I rebut your suggestion that I misled Parliament. The question was asked prior to the termination of the RFP, and for probity reasons and to ensure that the probity was not breached, I was in a position to reiterate the existing position, and it was the existing position. The RFP process was not terminated till the 7th of April. And if you want to talk about people having different positions, Senator Minchin, I'm happy to draw your attention to the Senate Select Committee on NBN on the 3rd of March 2009, when you said what you're really saying is what the rest of us have always thought, that that is not going to be commercially feasible. And we're talking about 98% fibre coverage in Australia. And fibre to the node may be 80 to 90%, but some form of wireless or satellite solution will be required for, let us say for the sake of the argument, the final 8%. That's you, Senator Minchin. Then on November the 13th, 2008, the Coalition fully recognised that on a continent as vast as Australia, a mix of technologies must be utilised to ensure equitable and reliable nationwide broadband coverage. But after the NBN announcement, with the new 90-10 split, you went on to say on the 14th of April, now this promise of 98% fibre to the node has been wound back to 90%. So it's people in the bush who are going to miss out again because the government really doesn't care about them. And in the Herald Sun, you went on to say, the plan would widen the gulf between the city and the country. I think for a proposed taxpayer spend of this magnitude, people living outside major centres quite rightly expect a degree of parity. But instead we are seeing disappointments. I've almost finished. I do appreciate that you have been very patient. I have almost finished, Senator Minchin. Disappointment. Smaller communities learn they will get speeds of 12 meg, while people in the city will get 100 meg. Comparatively, instead of bridging the digital divide, Labor wants to spend billions of dollars to widen it. Now, Senator Minchin, you can't have it both ways. You can't, in your own words at the Senate Select Committee in March, say that it is not commercially feasible to go past 90% or 92%, I think you were perhaps suggesting. I actually think it was 90, but I'll allow you to correct me on 90 or 92, and then attack this government for a 90-10 solution. It really is walking both sides of the street. No, it
quite irrelevant.
Smacks of political opportunism.
That's a complete misrepresentation of what I was saying.
Of
and you
political
know our concern
opportunism
is the relative position you will leave the rural Australians in as a result of your policy. But
the Opal project.
The issue I'm raising,
the Opal
Conroy,
project delivered a backwater, non-upgradable 6 megs to a vast majority, 40% of Australians. Senator Minchin, a backwater 6 meg rate that was not upgradable.
Minister, you keep wanting to go off on tangents, and I'm delighted when you highlight the fact that Senator Minchin clearly would have made a better communications minister than you, because he was highlighting
It's across the table. It's really not adding anything to the proceedings this afternoon.
He was highlighting the fact that your NBN project could not be delivered well before you conceded that was the case. But the question originally from Senator Minchin went to, were you misleading the Parliament? Now, Senator Conroy, you've responded essentially arguing probity reasons, saying that you couldn't come clean because of probity reasons. So is that some type of justification for quite transparently having received as you had the expert panel report, the secret letter from Ms Scott, to then go into the Parliament and deliberately mislead Parliament, deliberately mislead the ATUG conference, deliberately mislead the Communications and Media Law Association, speech after speech after speech. You kept repeating the same policy when you knew it was a dead policy.
Well, I expect Senator Minchin's staff to misunderstand and misconstrue. You don't have the same excuse. What you're trying to suggest is if a minister stood up one day and said, this is our position on tax, and the budget came down the next day, and the minister had been involved in the deliberations, and there was a new position on tax, you would claim that the day before the minister misled Parliament. This is a patent nonsense.
But you knew it was a dead policy. You knew it could not be delivered. Your expert panel had told you by then the policy you kept reinforcing to the Australian Senate and in speech after speech to industry groups around the country could not be delivered.
You are wilfully misleading this committee with these suggestions, Senator Birmingham. You're not a rookie. You're an experienced senator now, and you are wilfully misleading the committee, suggesting that I have misled. That's a very serious charge, and that's why I take such umbrage at it, Senator Birmingham.
Take all the umbrage you like
You
at
are
it, Minister.
wilfully misleading and misrepresenting my position, and you should know better.
Well, Minister, did you? I assume, of course, that when you had received the expert panel report on the 21st of January, that obviously you looked at it pretty swiftly because you were on the plane with the Prime Minister pretty swiftly thereafter and talking about the contents of it. Surely by that stage you knew that the 98% policy, that the fibre to the node policy, was not deliverable.
The RFP was terminated on the 7th of April, Senator Birmingham. It was part of probity, part of the government's position until the government terminated.
And there are many...
Or until, sorry, I terminated on behalf of the government.
And there are many forms of words that you could have used, or indeed, more importantly, probably not used, in the period of time between the 21st of January and the 7th of April, that would not have been as misleading as the words you chose to use, time and time again, reinforcing a policy that was not achievable.
I reject utterly your suggestion. You're not privy to the discussions that took place. You are not in a position to make that assertion at any stage, Senator Birmingham. It is simply you looking for a cheap political headline. You're not involved in discussions. You weren't aware of all the information the government was considering, and it is patently wrong to make such a serious allegation based on no evidence whatsoever.
Well, when did you decide that your election policy was unachievable?
I terminated the RFP after careful and lengthy consideration on the 7th of April this year.
And you won't acknowledge that with your 893-page expert panel report and your several pages of secret letter from the 21st of January that sometime thereafter, in your flights with the Prime Minister across north, south and east, west across the country, that you couldn't actually have made a determination the policy was not achievable.
Senators and Minister, we've been on this topic now since 2:35 this afternoon, and I know, Senator Minchin, you wish to do this in chronological order. We don't seem to be getting far along the timeline, I have to say. There are other senators who want to ask questions about the National Broadband Network before we finish proceedings. So can we make some progress?
As you know, we've been very
or else I'll give the call to another senator.
Well, we've been very tolerant of government questions. I think this is the biggest issue, and I think it's appropriate for opposition senators to question the government in particular on what they assert is the biggest infrastructure investment ever made in this country, and a lot of taxpayers' dollars involved. I think it's
I'm just making the point that at the beginning of proceedings I said I would share the time around, and we have been with coalition senators since 2:35 on this matter.
Well, we've had mostly Senator Conroy talking, frankly. Can I ask...
sorry, Senator Minchin, I just want to foreshadow. I've got some questions that I would like on this issue that I'd like to ask before dinner time, and also to throw in the comment that we're clearly not progressing anywhere. The questions aren't revealing anything, so I'd like to urge opposition senators to move on.
Well, with great respect, this does go to process, and I think there's critical issues that need to be answered in relation to process, and for the Parliament to be satisfied with what's occurring here. I think these are proper questions of process and decision-making and how a government does decide to spend $43 billion.
Abuse and incorrect allegations about misleading the minister, I don't think is progressing this issue. So I just want to say that
I'm happy to move
you're
on
not going anywhere.
Thank you, Senator Minchin. And I'd just point out it's very difficult for Hansard to transcribe banter across the chamber when people are talking over the top of each other.
I think it's largely good-natured.
Minister, if we could all stick to questions and answers, that would be very helpful for everybody.
It would be helpful if the Minister would just give straight answers.
Chair, would I be able to just mention that I hadn't said earlier in response to Senator Minchin, I didn't mention Defence Signals Directorate in the list of the organisations that provided commentary on fibre to the premise and fibre to the node. So, Defence Signals Directorate.
It's appropriate that our spy agency is involved.
Thank you, Ms Scott.
Could I turn to the fact that you've decided upon to set up a new government business enterprise in relation to this matter? A significant decision. That company has been registered, I understand, with ASIC. There was some commentary about the fact that the government appeared very reluctant to make any announcement about that registration. Is there anything to that? I'm not asserting it, but I wonder if there was any reason why
Registered.
you did not announce that you'd
Perhaps,
registered that
Mr.
company on the
Lyons
8th of
or,
April.
Ms King might like to update you on it, Senator Minchin.
Yeah, the company has been established, was incorporated on 9th of April 2009, following the government's announcement on 7th of April 2009. It's incorporated as a wholly owned public company limited by shares under the normal process for incorporating companies with the Australian Securities and Investments Commission, ASIC. The company is currently registered with ASIC.
And there are three
There's appointed
servants of the government who are
three
directors,
senior public servants as representatives to undertake the early activity on establishing the corporate functions of the company.
Is the company being given a name?
The
What do we
company
call
is
it?
currently registered with its ACN as its name.
We just call it NBN code,
It's
do we?
colloquially referred to as NBN.
Could you advise the committee on the process by which this company will acquire a board and a chief executive?
The government is moving to engage an executive search agency to assist in the appointment of the ongoing board.
And is it clear that the board, once appointed, will choose a CEO for this company?
Yes. The
accordance
board
with normal practice?
the board will have that responsibility.
Do you have a timeline for the A, appointment of a board, and B,
Free trade agreement requirements, as I'm sure you're conscious of, Senator Minchin, always require a rigorous process and an open and transparent process. So we're bound by the guidelines of the trade agreements that we've entered into, but perhaps Ms King or
USFTA?
Lyons, USFTA. So may be able to update that on.
when should we anticipate the announcement of a
We've got to
board?
engage the firm first.
Well, once we've engaged the firm and
Oh, you
advised
haven't done
government, it'll be then a matter for government to make that decision and make the announcement.
So this is probably some months down the track.
The selection of the executive firm, we hope that we can move reasonably quickly to that, and then it will just be a matter of time after that in terms of government deliberations.
Have those firms been shortlisted?
We've identified a number of firms that we are going to go to select tender, Senator, and we've identified a number of suitable firms that we'll approach.
There's a budget allocation to this company of 1.1 million. Is that does that cover the costs of the executive search firm? Where is that? And if not, what is the 1.1 million?
I thought we're paying for it. We're paying for that, aren't we? Yeah. We're paying for the executive search firm, Senator.
Or just then, could you just tell me what the 1.1 million is? That in anticipation of board fees, is it? Or?
Senator, if you can refer me to I've got any number of pages marked with NBN, so if you can give me a hint, Senator, I'll try and help you with the explanation.
Yeah, I haven't got the.
Got to get a computer there, Senator
No,
Minchin.
right,
Come into,
I can assure you there is
come into
1.
the 21st century. You'll find that you can use it for more than faster downloads of movies.
Thanks. Well, you can tell us what page the 1.1 million's on, but I assure you it's in there, and I thought you would know what you have allocated 1.1 million for without having to go back to the PBS.
I'll see if our CFO can find the 1.1.
Come back to that. So presumably no decision's been made about board fees, where this company be located. They're all decisions yet to be
No, there's
made.
still decisions to be made.
But you will be introducing legislation to establish this company.
Correct. Not to establish the company. I think Mr Lyons indicate that we have established the company.
Well, you've registered with ASIC.
Yeah, we're registered with ASIC. In terms of the legislative arrangements on which it will operate, the government has indicated that we will be introducing legislation in terms of the the regulatory regime that it will function. And I think we referred earlier in testimony to the discussion paper and commentary due by 3rd of June for some of the regulatory matters that we've gone to the public domain with. But do you want to add any more?
Yeah, well, only to say that the distinction, I suppose, Senator, is between the company has been established under company law.
Yeah.
It'll be regulated. The government's announced intention that for investor confidence and public certainty, the company should be regulated in such issues as ACCC oversight and retail ownership caps.
Now, the government has indicated a minimum shareholding of 51%. Has the government indicated a maximum shareholding in this company? I mean, currently it owns all the shares, but...
The government has indicated that there will be retail ownership caps yet to be determined. Other issues relating to the structure of the company will be finally determined after the implementation study.
But it's correct to say the government will retain a minimum of 51%?
Yes.
But there's no maximum put on that. That could be theoretically 100%.
The government hasn't announced any particular maximum, but there is an implementation study that's being undertaken.
And the government's indicated its interest in having...
Yeah, but if nobody wants to buy into the company...
We've said we would be the 100%
if necessary.
And
presumably the Ministers for Communications and Finance are the shareholder ministers, are they?
They are.
Been there, done that.
Fine ministers.
Could I just turn to the funding of this matter? You've indicated that the $4.7 billion that's been much spoken of, and which is the residue of the Communications Fund, please correct me if I'm wrong, of what is now $2.4 billion, and the proceeds of the last tranche of T3, which is 2.3, form the equity that the Commonwealth intends to provide to this company. Is that correct?
Do you want to answer that, Mary?
Sure. The $4.7 billion will be funded by $2.4 billion from the Building Australia Fund and $2.3 billion which will be raised from Aussie infrastructure bonds to be issued by Treasury.
Say that again.
$2.3 billion to be raised from Aussie infrastructure bonds.
So the only equity going in is actually 2.4.
Well, the $4.7 billion will be an equity injection into the company.
Being put in.
Yes.
I'm asking about the source of the 4.7.
Its components are two, as Ms King has just explained.
2.4 billion.
2.7 and 2.3 equals 4.7.
Yeah.
I'm asking you the source of the 4.7. What you're now telling me is that the 4.7 billion no longer comprises equity the government or capital the government has possession of, which is the and which you publicly said would be put into NBN 1.
I had hoped that you had watched our press conference, Senator Minchin, but it is disappointing to find that you didn't when the Prime Minister outlined that it would be a combination of money from BAF and Aussie infrastructure bonds. He did actually make this point in the press conference when we first held it, but perhaps you weren't able to...
I did watch the press conference with much agony. The government had, up until that point, repeatedly made the claim that
You're out there hugging those nodes.
$4.7 billion, which was to be injected originally into the first NBN exercise, and both Senator Connor and certainly Mr Tanner confirmed this, would come from the Communications Fund, which was $2.4 billion, which you've now transferred to the BAF, and which I presume is the 2.4 you just referred to, Ms King, but that the other 2.3, and I have Mr Tanner's statement somewhere to this effect, would come from the, I think, the last tranche of the proceeds of the sale of T3.
That was under the original fibre to the node proposal. As I said, at the press conference, this matter was canvassed, and the Prime Minister and the Treasurer, and I think perhaps the Finance Minister himself canvassed this issue, that the component would consist of and it was in the press release, I think, where it canvassed that there would be two sources.
So now the government
I'm
has
happy
decided,
to be corrected, but I'm fairly
Yeah.
certain that was that
So
was
now the
case.
government has decided that, in fact, this $4.7 billion equity injection will not be comprised of capital at hand entirely, as was the case with NBN 1, but that it will comprise now essentially 50% of borrowings. That's, as I understand what you've just told us. So at some point, Minister, you had to make a decision that you would not put $4.7 billion of capital at hand into this company, but that instead you would only put $2.4 billion of capital at hand into this company and you would borrow the remainder.
Yes,
When was that
I think
decision made?
you are correctly identifying where we did make that decision.
So that was
Can I just correct, as I said, I just checking the press release. The press release says we make an initial investment in the network of $4.7 billion, but I'm fairly certain my memory is right on this, that there was discussion that we made up of different components.
Well, I'm not sure that's right. I mean, there was press speculation to that effect after your announcement, but I'm not sure
I think the reason the
you actually
speculation
made
was
it clear.
I don't know that the individual amounts were identified, which have now been identified, but I think there was, and they've been identified in the budget papers. But
Can I just?
I think the issue was canvassed at the press conference. I mean, I could be wrong again, but
I'm
I
not
think
sure
it
you're
was
right.
canvassed, which is what led to the speculation, because I'm not sure if a specific amount was identified in the press conference.
No, I mean, there's been speculation that you would be borrowing part of this initial equity injection, but this is the first, to be frank, that I've heard it confirmed. But what you're actually telling us is that when your policy was a $10 to $15 billion fibre to the node project, the government was going to inject $4.7 billion of equity which it had at hand. Now that it's become a $43 billion project, you're only going to inject $2.4 billion of equity.
We're injecting $4.7 billion in equity.
No,
comprising
you might as well be upfront.
$4.7 billion will be injected into the company. Cash will be in the bank of $4.7 billion. You can't actually deny that, Senator Minchin. If you want to,
You can't obfuscate. Can you not obfuscate on this?
If you want
Just
to
be straight
correctly
with us, Senator
identify
Conroy.
that the funding source of the $4.7 billion has changed, we plead guilty as charged.
Yeah, that's the point I'm just wanting to confirm.
$4.7 billion
is that when this was a $10 to $15 billion fibre to the node, there would be $4.7 billion injected, which was cash at hand in effect, none of it borrowed.
Okay.
Now that it's a $43 billion
let me
exercise,
just to
2.3 of the 4.7 will be
Just
borrowed.
to clarify, to confirm what I was saying earlier, here's a quote from the press conference. We, in order to establish initial equity stake on the part of the government, will be contributing $4.7 billion, which is, of course, the figure that was committed from our election commitment and will be drawn essentially from the Building Australia Fund. The additional equity that will be required will be financed by Aussie infrastructure bonds that we are indicating. So
Yeah,
we flagged that quite clearly there.
Oh,
that
that
there was
was not
going
quite
to be.
clear, Minister.
And that then led to.
that's why
that then led to. And I said this a little earlier. That then led to some of that speculation, and we've now absolutely confirmed in black and white that the equity injection of $4.7 billion will consist of two components. If you want to use the word component to describe it.
Well, it's
2.3.
one is borrowed, one isn't.
2.3 from BAF, I think, and 2.4 from BAF and 2.3 from Aussie infrastructure bonds.
I'm not accusing you of deliberately misleading the public at the
That's
time of your
'cause
press
we're
conference,
not.
but the words you just used have led the gallery and us to believe, because you said essentially drawn from the BAF, that the 4.7 was coming from the BAF, as had been the policy for NBN Mark 1, and that the remainder of the equity, which you said today, will have to be at least the difference between 11 billion and 4.7 billion, which is 6.3 billion, will be borrowed. That was the conclusion that everybody drew from the remarks made at the press conference. Now, I'm not accusing you of deliberately seeking to mislead people, but that was the logical conclusion drawn by, I think, just about everybody at the time. I thank you for confirming that, in fact, only effectively 50% of the initial 4.7 will come from BAF, the rest will be borrowed. A pertinent question is what happened to the $2.3 billion that was meant to go into this company and now will not, but will be borrowed instead. But that's not your responsibility.
I invite you to ask, I think, finance.
Yeah, that's not your responsibility. I accept that. That's gone off into the ether somewhere. But what we're facing is a situation where to get your $11 billion in equity, there's going to be at least $8.6 billion borrowed, as I understand it.
Sorry, Senator Mitchin.
Now that only 2.4 of actual cash at hand is going into this equity, and given that you said the company will require at least $11 billion of actual equity from the government, that's to give it, if it's a 50-50 debt-to-equity ratio for this company, you have to borrow $8.6 billion simply to provide the government's share of the equity in this company. Is that correct?
That's based over an 8-year period.
Yeah, right.
But I'm making sure that you can't misrepresent the context and try and lump it all
I
into.
wouldn't do that, Senator.
No, I know that, but others around you may. Others around you may. I mean, so I just want to make sure that people understand that's over an 8-year period. You can't take it all and lump it into 1 year and try and pretend that somehow it is all catalogued
I appreciate you
in 1 year.
Spend out.
But yes,
just trying to get a handle on the extent of the borrowings required.
I think your assumption at this stage is a reasonable assumption, but government finances do change. But I think it is a reasonable proposition that you're putting forward.
Thank you. Can I just turn to the costing, and then I'd be happy to. We did touch on this $43 billion and the basis on which you came to that costing. Are you able to give the committee at least some breakdown of that $43 billion in terms of wages, equipment, capital, expenditure?
The implementation study is examining most of those issues. Ms. Scott, did you?
You must have built the $43 billion from the ground up by looking at all the components and what that each cost.
I think last time, Senator, I got to the stage of explaining that we drew on information available from within the department and from sources, including our advisors. They are preliminary estimates. Given the highly confidential nature of the initiative, we were unable to approach all the sources we would have liked to in developing the preliminary estimates, and the government was aware of that limitation and took that into account, and there's a contingency built into the estimates. The three significant elements of the project are the fibre rollout, the wireless rollout and the satellite element. On fibre, advice was provided by our advisors. We also obtained information from public sources, information from specific projects the department has been engaged in. On wireless, the department has a body of recent knowledge on wireless projects and costings, and the department was also able to draw on advice from our technical advisors. On satellite...
So Opal was of some use to you then. I'm pleased to hear it.
On satellite, our advisors had recent experience in large satellite projects overseas and were able to draw on this international experience. We also analysed the cost components. Of course, we're very familiar with and had analysed recently the cost components of the proposals submitted for the NBN. So on that basis, we drew up the estimates and we worked with our colleagues in the Department of Finance and Deregulation.
Thanks, Ms. Scott. Can I ask, did you start from the proposition that the government wanted to deliver 90% fibre and the rest wireless satellite and then determine how much that cost? Or did you start with, well, how much can we afford and what will that buy us? Did you look at, for example, the cost of 95% fibre to the premises and reject it then as being far too expensive? I mean, how was this?
Well, Senator, I feel uncomfortable going into that level of detail because that goes to the advice provided to government. But I did want to give you information about the information sources we draw on, because you'd asked that earlier question. So.
Can I ask if this estimate is based on a particular architecture for the thing? As I understand it, there are basically two, point-to-point or GPON. Is this based on one or the other?
We did look at, and the government's announcement refers to next generation technology. So the emphasis was on fibre to the premise and next generation technology.
As I indicated in a recent speech, Senator mentioned that's one of the issues that we've invited views on, and the implementation study is looking at that.
But as I understand, there are quite significant differences in
yes,
rollout costs. So presumably the $43 billion was based on one or the other, because there would be.
As I said, there is a cost estimate. You continue to draw on just one figure, $43 billion. There is a cost estimate between 38 and 43. I'm relaxed about people jumping on using only the $43 billion Senator mentioned. And within that, as has been indicated, there is a significant contingency figure.
And
other than that, I'm not prepared to second
guess. You can't
guess.
tell us whether the 43 is based on one or the other.
I said there's a significant contingency, and there is a cost estimate between 38 and 43.
So you're suggesting that we're at
I draw your attention to, I think I quoted it a little earlier, a report by Ian Martin, who has taken the initiative of going and actually speaking to people who build fibre to the home proposals. I might even invite you to take the same initiative, Senator Minchin. And he calculates it somewhere between 20 to 30 billion. Now, he's made a range of assumptions in there, and he's made a range of assumptions about technology.
Well, there are
it
others
wouldn't
who
be
think
hard.
it'd be more expensive, but
It wouldn't be hard for you to be able to kick together a few assumptions and bounce it off a few companies and get your own cost estimates. But I repeat to you what I've repeated consistently: nobody has suggested that this is an underestimate to achieve our objective.
well, that depends.
Nobody.
Does it?
Even you, Senator.
Is this $43 billion include all costs of connections to premises? I is the presumption that this will be right to the wall.
To the wall.
Can I ask, is this actually a figure, this $43 billion in 09 dollars, or is it an estimate of what the final project cost will be in 2018?
Yeah, no, welcome, Senator Minchin. You are one of the few people in the world who understands what an out-year price is.
Regrettably, it's
yes, regrettably, it's, I have been learning
not
about
something
them.
I go around.
I have been learning
boasting
about them
about
recently myself. Yes, Senator Minchin, it's an out-year figure.
I'm pleased to hear that.
Which
finance is doing their work.
finance, as you would hope, are continuing to do fine work.
I'm delighted to hear that. Thank you.
So again, that actually, I'm sure, then helps you understand that some of the calculations and estimates and claims about various aspects of this are quite comical.
Well, I'm still alarmed at $43 billion, but I'm becoming more reassured that it may not be $63 billion, but we'll wait and see. My experience of government is that all projects come in over time and over budget. But and just go
the
down
Department of Finance are well
just go
trained
down
by
to the
yourself.
Defence Department, Senator Conroy,
The
and
Department of
you'll
Finance are well
know
trained
all
by
about
yourself.
project management. I'm happy to defer to others at this point, Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Minchin. We'll go to Senator Wortley, and we'll try and get Senator Fielding in before dinner. I'm aware Senator Nash also has questions. Away you go, Senator
Thank
Wortley.
you, Chair. I have questions specifically on the Regional Backbone Black Spots program. I'd like to start off with asking the department if you could provide a brief outline about what is meant by the backbone infrastructure and why it's so important for the delivery of broadband services.
Okay. Backbone is basically the infrastructure that transports telecommunication signals, and they could be voice, data, video, between the customer network and back through the telephone exchange, and then back through to centralised points in the network where the service provider's core infrastructure is located. So often that core infrastructure is generally located in state capital cities, and if your customers are located in a regional centre, This can mean that the communications needs to travel between infrastructure that's can be hundreds of kilometres apart. So to get the full benefits of high-speed broadband customer access technology, such as fibre to the premises, backbone links to the core infrastructure need to have capacity. Otherwise, they become bottlenecks. It'll limit speed and service speeds available to end users. And for a customer, from a customer perception, that will end up with slower downloads, lower resolution on their video, poor quality internet telephony services.
So what companies currently own backbone or significant backbone infrastructure in Australia?
Well, Telstra certainly owns significant backbone infrastructure. The other sort of next tier carriers such as Optus, NextGen, APT and Sol will own backbone infrastructure. There's also infrastructure that's owned by utilities and rail companies that can sometimes be used to provide telecommunication services. People like Powerlink, Queensland Rail, VicTrack, those sorts of people will have backbone infrastructure that could be used to provide telecommunication services.
Does the department consider that there is a lack of competitive backbone infrastructure in regional areas?
Well, the ACCC's regulatory decision-making probably provides a bit of a guide to that, because under the Telecommunications Access Regime, the Trade Practices Act, it's a matter for the ACCC to declare access to what it considers to be bottleneck services where there's not sufficient competition. And so, in the case of backbone or transmission routes, the ACCC has decided to exempt those areas where it thinks there is sufficient competition, but to keep the declaration alive for those areas where they don't think there's sufficient competition and where they believe that there needs to be an ability for access seekers to go to the ACCC and notify a dispute if they can't get commercial resolution from what might be a monopoly provider. So it has exempted a number of capital city and to regional backbone links in New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland and South Australia. For example, it might be, say, Sydney to Albury might be exempt, or Melbourne to Ballarat, or Brisbane to Toowoomba. But for all the other capital city regional backbone links that haven't been actually exempted, the ACCC has kept access obligations in place on Telstra because there's a lack of competitive infrastructure. So basically where there's competing infrastructure, the ACCC has tended to exempt. Where there's only one set of infrastructure where people get access to, the ACCC has decided there should be a right of regulated access. So where there isn't competitive pressure on the supplier of a backhaul transmission service to offer low prices or high quality services, it means that providers, if they can't get a competitive price, may not be able to offer competitive retail and wholesale service in regional areas.
So is that the impact then on consumers and businesses in regional areas?
Yes, it will. And I think the Glasson's review, the Regional Telecommunications Inquiry, found that it was a specific concern, that the availability of adequate backhaul had an impact on the price, the availability, the type and the quality of telecommunications service that could be delivered to many regional communities. And that service providers that want to get into access those communities can be deterred from doing so because the backhaul price is too high. Now, that's not to say there isn't a regulated right of access, but there's a fairly slow, cumbersome process to get that access, and that's one of the issues that's also addressed in the department's or the government's regulatory discussion paper.
Does the department have information on the cost differentials between areas that have competing backbone infrastructure and areas that do not?
It's probably, there's some caution about that because in trying to compare the cost of delivering services to different locations, but because it probably depends on the volume of data that's flowing along the transmission link and the length of the run. But there are anecdotal examples where, for example, the cost of backhaul in a key regional town, say Bunbury and Port Hedland, might be 250 to 700% higher in those key regional towns than from Perth to Sydney. So that is it's an example. It's probably need to be careful drawing exact comparisons between different locations. But the other thing that can happen is that when in our consultations, we're aware that there are examples where someone comes in and provides competitive backhaul, that suddenly backhaul prices can fall. For example, we understand in Mildura, where there was a competitive backbone services offered, the prices fell by 40% in 2006.
So what's the strategy to fix the backbone problem in Australia?
Well, this really goes to the backbone black spots program, which is not attempting to address all backhaul problems throughout Australia, because partly that'll be done through the establishment of the National Broadband Network itself and the National Broadband Company, but to address priority black spot locations and put in place key infrastructure for the National Broadband Network at the same time. So it's at the same time, as well as this program we're running, and we're in the middle of a consultation process on shaping that process. We've gone through there's a consultation paper gone out, discussion paper. We'll be certainly going out to a request for proposals for specific locations shortly. But so the strategy, I suppose, is threefold. First of all, the priority black spots program. Secondly, the National Broadband Network will give that impetus to the National Broadband Network Company to acquire backhaul transmission services, and in doing that it will often be building new routes and providing competitive pressure where there's existing backbone networks. But also, as I said before, the government's review discussion paper has said, well, are there better ways of people getting access to backhaul, not only to backhaul transmission but other declared services? Is there a more streamlined process? And one of the options that was floated there was to have a more certain set of prices for people when they get access to bottleneck services, and backhaul is a good example. And if companies can know they can get a certain price, that gives them that certainty of conducting their business planning better.
Is the $250 million announced by the government the only money that will be spent on upgrading and extending backhaul in Australia?
No, I think, as I said before, that the government's investment in the National Broadband Network will include an investment in the backhaul infrastructure necessary for that network to provide high-speed broadband to communities within the reach of the network for both the fibre and the wireless components of the network. So that investment by the company of $43 billion, that's going to include an investment in backhaul as well.
In relation to the consultation papers, how many submissions have you received?
I think we've received about 67 submissions from industry and from state, territory, local government bodies. I think we've received 38 from industry, 3 from private individuals. And the majority of those are public submissions, and they'll be available on the website shortly.
They'll be put on the website.
Yeah.
When do you expect construction of these links to begin?
I mentioned earlier that we're wanting to release a request for tender shortly, within the next few weeks, and commence construction activities in September of this year.
I understand that Opel was going to deliver 15,000 kilometres, I think it was, of backhaul infrastructure. Had the contract been met?
Well, I suppose the first thing about the Opel funding agreement was that the funding agreement was terminated because Opel didn't meet the condition precedents of the funding agreement. I think it's been publicly stated that Opel did include a backhaul component of 15,000 kilometres. I think the thing to note about that is that only about 16% of that proposal would have been for new backhaul infrastructure. I think the other thing is that the priority areas that are being identified for this program may not necessarily have been aligned with what was in the Opel proposal. And I suppose, but the exact locations of the backbone infrastructure for this program will be worked through as part of when the request for proposals is issued.
Can I just ask on that? Sorry, can I just ask one just on that? With the consulting, the process being underway at the moment, and obviously there's a lot to be worked through about where the most appropriate places are going to be. Yeah. How did you arrive at the figure of $250 million if you don't know yet where it's going to go?
Look, can I indicate that the 250 is just the beginning? It's not actually a cap. There are, as you understand, to reach 90% of Australians fibre to the home, there's going to be need potentially backbone all over the country.
So this is a bit of a patch-up job for where it's really falling down at the moment.
Well, the ACCC identified a range of areas that were as it described them, backhaul black spots, where there's only the one piece of fibre that exists at the moment.
All right. And around the ACCC, hasn't there been a range of issues from potential carriers that simply haven't had the might or the wherewithal to take on potentially other companies through the ACCC process?
That's exactly what's driving us doing this. And I said 250 is not the cap. 250 is the beginning. To reach out to 90%, we're potentially, depending on vending ins, going to need a lot more than 250. So I wouldn't want you to leave with the impression, Senator Nash, that this was the end of the process. This is very much a beginning. It's just to identify the really grotesque outcomes that have happened in a whole range of regional centres, like Mildura in Victoria, like Mount Isa, like Mount Gambier, like Geraldton, Broken Hill, for instance, across and Darwin, just to name a number of major centres that people just automatically assume that there's reasonable broadband available, and there just isn't.
Okay, thanks for your indulgence.
Thank you. Is the NBN likely to deliver more or less backhaul than Opal?
Well, I think it's, as I said before, the Opal project was delivering 16%, as I understand it, would have been new backhaul. And as the Minister has said, this $250 million is simply the priority areas. The Opal project wasn't capable of delivering on its condition precedents for its funding agreement, and we would expect the National Broadband Network to be delivering significant backhaul.
Why was Tasmania selected to be the first place for the NBN to be rolled out?
I think the expert panel indicated that did suggest that there was merit in further consideration of the Tasmania. It noted that Tasmania had particular broadband bottlenecks. It has 39% broadband penetration compared to the national average of 52%. There's less competition in Tasmania than or competitive services in Tasmania than the other states. I think the government, it was also the government's announced in relation to Tasmania that it will be using fibre to the home technology, which is consistent with the government's policy.
What about available speeds in Tasmania compared to other states and territories?
Look, I don't have any. I'd have to take on notice the question of speeds, and there's also the question of the peak speeds that might be available to some people in Tasmania, but it's also the access that they've got to broadband services. So I'd have to take that question on notice.
Can the Tasmanian proposals be progressed without legislative or regulatory changes?
The Tasmanian proposal is being progressed without legislative or regulatory changes. There are negotiations currently underway with Tasmania. The National Broadband Network Company, as I mentioned before, will be subject to regulation, but the rollout itself, the negotiations on the rollout are proceeding without the need for legislation.
Minister, can you, or are you aware of any coalition members calling for Tasmania to be prioritised in the broadband rollout?
Thanks for that question, Senator Wortley. Look, as a matter of fact, I am. In his former guise as Shadow Minister for Broadband, Mr Bruce Bilson said, and I quote, "I'm calling on Senator Conroy to guarantee the people of Tasmania that they will be among the first in the nation."
Senator Wortley was asking about Tasmanian members.
Well,
I said coalition members.
One of your fellow Victorians.
Coalition members.
That they will be among the first in the nation to gain affordable new broadband services. And I can assure Mr Bilson, even in his new role, that this will be the case.
What's been the reaction of Tasmania and opposition to the NBN announcement?
Look, Senator Guy Barnett stated on April the 30th, it may come as a surprise, and I quote, "The opposition welcomes Tasmania being the first state to access the network." And Mr Will Hodgman, the Tasmanian opposition leader, stated in The Australian on April the 8th, "I'm worried about the best interest of Tasmanians and we are supportive of the federal government investment." Senator Minchin, I was just pointing out Senator Guy Barnett's support for the Tasmanian broadband rollout, and Will Hodgman, the Tasmanian opposition leader's support of the federal government investment. I didn't want you to miss that because you...
thank you.
I know you are following these matters closely.
I know all about state
Senator
government.
Nash, I
know all about
being
state
very
government.
nice there, but if you provoke me, I may have to go to
No,
other
no, no,
place.
no, no, very
Order.
genuine question. I just want to know why why there isn't any legislation required to start the rollout in Tasmania. Not,
But the,
I just
it
want
is.
on record. Is it or isn't it?
It doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist.
It's got three
Sorry?
public servants.
A registered company.
Three public servants. Come on.
I'm glad to see you're eagerly awaiting the outcome of the negotiations with the Tasmanian government. on the
I'm
Raw.
eagerly awaiting the
But
answer
sorry,
to the question.
Senator Nash would like you to stop interjecting so we can answer her question.
Do you want me to ask it again? Was just about why was there no need for legislation to start the rollout, as you indicated, in Tasmania?
Might go back to the expert panel process. A number of proponents had proposals that required overbuild protection or regulatory change that was significant in its own right, and a Tasmanian proposal, I think I'm going to say it was unique or close to unique in that it didn't require overbuild protection and substantial regulatory change in order to move ahead.
Is that
And
you weren't going to tread on anyone's toes by starting rolling it out down there?
Basically,
quite
it
genuinely.
didn't have. It could proceed. It could proceed without other things being
Without
required.
Any hurdles? Could we have, and I'm mindful that it's Senator Wortley's time and I'm happy for you to take this on notice, but could we perhaps have for the committee provided the amount of existing backhaul and the amount of existing services? I know you mentioned penetration there, but I think in 2003 there was $230 million for 450 kilometres of backhaul. I think since then, 2005, there's been another 100 kilometres of underground. So it'd be interesting to note how much is already existing that the government's not going to do before it comes out and claims that it's done the whole thing. Thanks. Thanks, Senator Wortley.
Senator Wortley finished your line of questioning.
Could we just, on Tasmania, just quickly, if that's because I think that was the... If we're just doing Tasmania, have you indicated publicly what the size of the federal government contribution to this
No,
rollout
sir.
in Tasmania is? When will we know that?
We're in negotiations with them. I'm sure you wouldn't want us to reveal the extent
Well,
of...
I think get the best deal for federal taxpayers.
We're absolutely... that's why we're not going to tell you what our price is.
But presumably this is essentially the Tasmanian government's submission or proposal to the RFP process.
No, it's I guess I don't want to reveal everything about the negotiations, but the panel suggested that the government consider the Tasmanian proposal because of the factors that Mr Lyons outlined earlier. But it's not. We're not starting on the basis of what they initially put in was where we want to finish. There's actually been intense discussions on what we consider to be a superior proposal in terms of meeting the federal government's objectives for outcomes.
I respect that, and I would expect you would not be ripped off by the rapacious Tasmanian government. You will seek to get the best deal for federal taxpayers. But can I ask well, I suppose you're even going to put a ballpark on what might be the federal government.
For the very reasons that you are alluding to, though,
Yeah.
I would of course
But I
never
would
describe my colleagues in any state government as rapacious.
You wouldn't?
As you did. Senator
You wouldn't?
Minchin.
Gosh, you haven't been around. Can I ask at least the source?
Can we get this line of questioning finished?
Yeah, I'd like to know the source of whatever funding is provided to Tasmania for the enhancement of their broadband services. What is the source of the funding, the figure to be revealed at a later date?
So it's part of the $4.7 billion.
So that comes out of that as well.
Yes.
So the 250 for the backhaul comes out of that, and then whatever you give to Tasmania comes out of that.
Yes, they're basically all part of the 43.
Including this. Okay, thank you.
Senator, I couldn't find the one.
Just to be clear, Tasmania is part of the continent of Australia, or the country of Australia, and is part of the national.
I'm pleased you recognise that.
Yeah.
We certainly recognise that in government. As you may recall, when Senator Harradine was in Parliament,
I just concerned about
used to attack us for putting so much investment into Tasmania.
Had throwaway line, Senator Minchin.
You used to attack us for investing in Tasmania, Senator Conroy.
Chair, I just
yes, Ms.
I
Scott.
did try to quickly look through the papers again, Senator. I just can't quite find that reference to one.
Oh, let me find it.
Okay. I'm sorry, I've asked the CFO and he can't find it either, so they're both eluding us. I'm sorry, Senator.
Now, Senator Fisher, have you got a question on Tasmania?
About Tasmania. Thank you, Chair. On the day that the government announced its very good plans for Tasmania, the Prime Minister essentially said that what the government is doing in Tasmania in terms of fibre to the home is not necessarily possible in the rest of the country. Does not necessarily possible mean that it is possible in some places for some people?
Sorry, could you just clarify your comment there?
The Tasmanian plan is fibre to the home. Not everybody in the rest of Australia is being promised fibre to the premises.
No, we're not suggesting that Tasmania is getting 100% fibre to the home.
What did the Prime Minister mean when he said what is being promised to Tasmanians is not necessarily possible in the rest of Australia? And does that mean it is possible in some other places for some other people? And if so, where is the government's plan to assess whom else in Australia, and particularly rural and regional Australia, can be afforded the same services and the same access as Tasmanians are blessed enough to be getting?
I'm not familiar with the particular quote, so I'm hoping that you can.
Was reported in the Australian.
Yeah, I'm not denying it. I'm just saying I'm hoping you can. You have it handy. I'm sure you do. And like Senator mentioned, you have joined the 21st century over here.
The Prime Minister says it's feasible to link up a whole bunch of quite small communities in Tasmania,
that's what I thought,
but it would not necessarily be possible elsewhere.
The geography of...
Understood. Does not necessarily possible, Minister, mean that it could be possible elsewhere?
Okay. What we've said, and I'll just go through it piece by piece if I could. What we said that in order to achieve 90% coverage, it is expected that FTTP network will extend to towns with a population of around 1,000 or more. However, the towns with a population of 1,000 figure is not a cut-off figure and has been stated purely to give an idea of about how far the FTTP element of the NBN will extend. It may be that because of the configuration of the trunk part of the network, and this goes to the point that you're, I think, trying to get some clarification on, that it will be simple to connect home and businesses in towns much smaller than 1,000 people. I note that on April the 8th, the Premier of Tasmania noted that the state broadband network would reach towns with a population as low as 50 people. The government will shortly commence its implementation study, which will, among other things, work through the detailed network design and rollout schedule for the NBN. It will also investigate the extent of coverage that will be achieved by FTTP, next generation wireless broadband and satellite elements. That implementation study is due for completion in early 2010. What I can assure you is that the town of Whitehaven won't be covered because that's in the UK.
Will the study have a map of who will be covered where and why?
The implementation study is designed to generate the configuration of the network, and I think even Next Gen today, in today's papers, have indicated that they have, and I don't have it handy right in front of me, I'm sure it will be available very shortly, they have indicated that they run within 5 kilometres of, I think they said, 350 towns of less than 1,000. So the direction of the backbone of the network will determine whether towns of less than 1,000 receive it or not. So the configuration of the network is critical to be able to establish that. I hope that addresses some of your concerns. But if I could just add...
That means it is possible in some other places in Australia, but where and when will the government be assessing where else it is possible and to whom else it is possible?
Well,
and when will you be showing that to people?
I'm not sure that I can be any clearer than explaining to you that the implementation study is considering those matters, and that is the purpose of the implementation study. The implementation study, as I indicated, will be available in early...
Will it have maps or just broad guidelines like towns of 1,000 or thereabouts? And, Minister, will you continue to talk about, you know, minimums you can reach rather than maximums we can deliver? Hinting that there's more, yet not wanting to be held accountable for the more that you seem to be hinting at, or the more you seem to be promising.
Senator Fisher, we allowed you
Thank
to
you,
ask
Chair.
a question
I'm not
about
sure it was
Tasmania.
Thank
We
you.
seem to have strayed a little.
Thank you, Senator.
Thanks, Senator.
Let me be clear. There is a deliberate misinformation campaign being run to suggest that 10% of Australians will miss out completely on the government's national broadband network. Let me be clear, because you did miss, unfortunately. I'm sure you're in another committee, so
Indeed.
I'm not suggesting anything other than that. We had a healthy, robust debate about how Senator Minchin kept reminding me that, in actual fact, we were exceeding our election commitment. And I'm grateful to Senator Minchin for his interjections regularly on that point. We have said that we will reach 100% of Australians with the national broadband network. 90% will receive the fibre to the home. The remaining 10 will receive the next generation satellite or wireless proposals, and there are a number of them that are being actively considered, and they will deliver the government's election commitment of 12 meg. And so we are more than confident. We have indicated as part of the package that we're prepared to establish a wireless network for the 10%, and we're also prepared to put up, if necessary, 2 new satellites with next-generation technologies. So all Australians will benefit from improved broadband due to the national broadband network, and the issue of allegations and suggestions that continue to be made by some that some Australians will miss out are just blatantly misleading and deliberately misleading Australians about the government's plan.
Oh, you didn't show us your nodes with NBN round 1, so we look forward to seeing the maps that Senator Minchin's been asking you for NBN round 2,
I'm
Minister.
I'm beginning to think you have an unhealthy interest in my nodes, Senator. As I think some of your colleagues, do think that as well.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Fielding, we'll try and squeeze you in before dinner.
Thank you, Chair. Look, going back to just the issue of the company that has been set up, I noticed that there was also some statements that it would generate 33,000 jobs or something. It's not you, but it was another Access, I think it was, Access Economics. How many roughly jobs or how many staff will there be in the NBN company, do you think, just roughly, given that you must have some? I'm not going to hold you to it either, but is it 100, thousands? Do you expect it to be in the top 100 companies in Australia or the top 1,000 companies in Australia? Just to give a bit of a ballpark feel.
What we've talked about is the ongoing construction phase. We've talked about the ongoing construction phase, I think 27,000 each year over the 8 years, and peaking at 35.
Yeah, I think
it might be 25, peaking at 37. I sometimes transpose those numbers.
25,000 peaking at 37.
Yeah, peaking at 37, but that's the construction of the network. In terms of, do we have any information at this stage, Mr. Lyons?
I think it's going to be a matter for the company to employ people, to put people on contracts to deliver services for it. It's going to be a mix of direct employees and contractors. And many of those are going to be involved in the construction of the network.
Has any discussions taken place of where the head office may be for such a company?
look, there is extensive discussion across the country about this. I think Premier Bligh wrote within 48 hours of the announcement to the Prime Minister on it. I think I was with I was with Premier Rees just recently at a function where he announced he formed a task force to cooperate and assist with the government in its preparations to base it in New South Wales. And I'm aware of Victoria already within a couple of days certainly holding a press conference, as well as an ongoing campaign that they've been involved in to argue the case that Victoria should be the base of the NBN. And I'm also aware, I think, of interest from the ACT.
Has your department started to consider possible locations for a head office?
Look, that's ultimately a matter in consultation with the board.
Is there any criteria that you're using at all in that regard?
Look, you're probably just jumping ahead of us a little bit at this stage, Mr. Senator Fielding. Where at the moment, I think you may have been here earlier when we discussed the establishment of the board, or the process to establish the board. So you're probably a step ahead of us at this stage.
I notice probably a bit of sour grapes that Victoria, even though we had a treasurer based in Victoria, lost the shipbuilding to South Australia, which was a big disappointment, I think, to most Victorians.
Well, as you know, Senator Fielding, I live in Williamstown, so I certainly understand the impact that will have on my local community, losing that contract. But yes, we're very conscious of a whole range of factors, and as I said, there is a very lively and worthwhile debate taking place.
The reason why I'm asking is that Victoria and Melbourne in particular is very much a hub for head office for telecommunications, and I'm just wondering, with the Treasurer being based in Queensland and the Prime Minister in Queensland, is there any moves to see it move to Queensland?
As I said, Premier Bligh has been campaigning since, I think, within 24 if not 48 hours, calling for it to be based in Queensland. I'm sure that the decision will be made on the basis of what is the best venue for the NBN to be based, rather than any parochial considerations. But I am certainly fully aware of the hub that you're referring to.
Because there could be, Minister, I don't know what criteria would be used, but certainly there is a very strong hub in Victoria. So
I can only agree with your commentary, Senator Fielding.
Yeah. When will that decision be made, do you think, and who will it be made by, do you think?
As I indicated, the board will make that in consultation.
In consultation with who?
In consultation. It will keep us informed of a whole variety of matters. The shareholder ministers, Mr Tanner and myself are the shareholder ministers. But fundamentally, it's a position for the board to decide, which is why I said you're a couple of steps ahead of us on criteria, because we've actually got to establish the board and then move on to the...
Yeah, I'm just thinking ahead. I would not like to see it.
Look, I wouldn't want to prejudice my position, but I'm very familiar with your arguments, Senator Fielding.
When is that decision likely to be made? I know that you can't. I mean, given that you've got a time frame, you've got a selection for finding us, then we've got
to find the CEO after that,
and those. So obviously this is being planned quite well.
All of these are very, very good questions which we are turning our mind to at the moment, and we're working through them as fast as probity, as fast as free trade agreement requirements, particularly on selection processes and that sort of thing, are able to be met. We're working to speedily resolve these issues, but I wouldn't mean speedily as in next week.
Roughly, do you think?
A month or two. For all of those decisions you're talking about, a month or two. Possibly the final decision on the home base might be a little bit longer, but there may be a range of factors for the board members to want to consider before they decide that. I'm sure there's other considerations that might be higher on their list than that. Certainly I would understand if it's high on your list, Senator Fielding. I'm certainly maintaining a very keen interest in it.
It's very high on my list, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Fielding. Senator Nash, we've got 10 minutes before dinner. Would you like to occupy that time?
Thanks, Chair. I'd be very happy to occupy a small bit of it. Obviously, and apologies I wasn't here this afternoon, if I do ask anything that has been, please just say. But given there's a long way to go before we actually end up with the configuration that this NBN is going to operate in, I appreciate that. But, Minister, regardless of the configuration that the NBN ends up in, will you commit to starting the rollout in regional Australia first?
Most of us, and I believe even your previous government, probably defined Tasmania as a region.
Sorry, I shall rephrase the question.
I'm not sure where you've. I'm not sure
well said,
if you
Minister.
just cut Tasmania off the map of
no,
Australia.
not at all. Not at all. I was considering.
Tasmania
That as having already been done, given you've already committed to that being done. When you come to the mainland, I shall preface my question. When you come to the mainland, after you leave the good state of Tasmania, will you commit to starting the rollout in regional Australia first?
Well, we've already indicated that we're going to spend $250 million of backbone infrastructure.
Okay.
In regional Australia.
So
as I said, I'm not trying to be cute with that answer. I'm just working my way through the different measures. We are going to be having those discussions with the board, but ultimately it will be based around the board's decision. But the point that many miss in this debate is you can start in many different places at the same time. It's not a function of you have to start in one place like a piece of road. If you're building, Pacific Highway number 1, you don't start in one spot. I mean, even nowadays you don't even do this, and you don't just keep going around the country adding on to the end. You actually are able to start the broadband rollout all over the country at the same time. Regional, as well as rural, as well as metropolitan.
That's a very big ask, though, to simply go plonk. We're going to start everywhere at once, and I understand what you're saying.
I don't mean literally everywhere at once, Senator, and I know that's not what you're trying to suggest.
I understand what you're saying. What I'm getting at is when we're talking about getting that 12 megabits out to those regional areas, that at no stage will a non-regional area requiring 12 megabits have precedence over it rolling out in the 12 megabit regional areas. So what I'm saying is, and you said everything can perhaps start at the same time. I doubt that very much, but the priority for regional Australia is obviously quite huge, given that they are in predominantly the underserved areas.
Absolutely.
So while I accept you're saying some of it can start similarly, will not starting in some of the more urban areas preclude further rolling out in the regional areas?
Look, I think, as I said, some of this comes down to ultimately decisions made by the company. So I can't absolutely speak on the company's behalf. Now, obviously, the government is a shareholder, so we're very conscious of wanting to ensure that there's an equitable approach to this. If you're saying that you should only start in regional and rural areas, I'd probably say to you that while regional and rural Australia have clearly been left behind, and there is a genuine digital divide, which I know that you yourself have talked about in the past, that there are many areas in metropolitan Australia, as well as regional Australia, that are equally as starved of broadband. I know I did see some commentary at a recent speech where Senator Minchin again incorrectly alleged that 80% of Australia can get 12 meg. I'm sure the information, the exact quote will come to me shortly, but any suggestion that 80% of Australians have access to fast broadband at the moment is just laughable. I think in Telstra's own words, they recently confessed publicly that something like only 33% of Australians. So there's a confusion, I think, in Senator Minchin's mind between a footprint and actual delivery. Because, as you know well, Senator Nash, there is a whole range of Australians that have been disadvantaged, not just because of their geography and distance, but because there has been technology put in place which is essentially broadband inhibiting. And yes, that quote of Senator Minchin's just last week at the ATUG conference, where he said 80% of Australians already have access to 24 meg. I was being far too generous to Senator Minchin. This is just not true, and I'm sure that you would agree. It's only an overstatement by around 250%. It just shows that some understanding of the nature of fixed-line telecommunication networks and the factors that work to limit the availability of ADSL and ADSL 2+ services across Australia, excuse me, including line distance, which is very relevant, degraded copper, pair gains and RIMS. And a number of those are directly relevant to regional and rural Australia. Telstra's Kate McKenzie indicated last year that around 33% of people currently have access to speeds of 12 megs or more. In other words, 66% of people do not.
Even I could do that maths.
I just thought I'd better help
Nearly.
Senator Minchin.
Nearly. Actually,
No, I was
quite-
really
not
trying to
quite
help
right.
Senator Minchin.
You left a little bit out there, I think.
Given that he made a claim of 80%.
So does that add up to 100, Minister? I'm not sure it does.
In an interview with Alan Kohler on the 16th of July, Kate McKenzie, Telstra Wholesale, stated, I guess one of the important motivators for the building of the FTTN network, and this is pre our announcement, is that at the moment only about 20% of customers can actually get 20 megabits of speed. Only 20%. The other two-thirds in metropolitan regions can't even get 12 megs, and more than 50% of people in the country can't get 12
True,
meg.
but can I just say that he's coming from Telstra and they've been the monopoly
Access
provider in a lot of
Economics.
areas. I understand.
Just very quickly, Access Economics report commissioned by Telstra on the economic impact of high-speed broadband found that 38% of the population have access to speeds of 12 meg. So even an independent body hired by them confirms roughly that Australians are absolutely being left behind in the digital divide.
I don't disagree.
So there
with
are, when you suggest that those with the greatest need are in regional and rural areas, what I would say to you is if you travel around Australia, tragically, this is not just a regional and rural problem.
No.
So there is an overwhelming majority of Australians not able to get access. So we want to be equitable about this, and certainly we'd be interested in your perspective on this, and we are more than willing to consider a whole range of issues in the implementation study when it comes to this matter.
Excellent. That's very good to hear, Minister. Can I just ask then, perhaps the department might be able to provide for the committee those areas of black spots, particularly, as I know do exist, as the Minister's just pointed out, particularly in the outer metropolitan area. So where we indeed do have those black spots at the moment, and what access they have, if any, and sort of up to what speed, to then get a very clear picture of, comparatively to regional areas, how many of those sort of underserved areas, if you like, do exist in those metro and outer metro areas. And I think, Minister, just to take you back to, you were talking about satellite and wireless for that last 10%. And I think you even indicated that, correct me if I'm wrong, that you're perhaps considering even an extra couple of satellites if that was going to be needed to do that job. Given the nature of wireless and satellite, and that they appear to be what's going to be predominantly used if this does indeed go ahead for those areas, the speed at which they can be implemented rather than a fibre to the premises, concurrently then, wouldn't you be able to commit to regional Australia coming first, given the speed at which they are going to be able to be implemented?
I think that's a very worthy matter you raise, and should be given very serious consideration, Senator Nash.
Okay. Can I just...
it's nearly 6 o'clock. Have you
I've got some more after dinner.
Okay.
I think then we'll adjourn for the dinner break and reconvene at 7 o'clock. Thank you. Proceeding, Senator Minchin, I understand you have a point of clarification.
Thanks.
And then we'll
just
go
I'll be
to-
quick.
No, that's okay.
I just wanted to clarify with Ms Scott, the 1.1 million to which I referred is monies being appropriated to the Department of Finance in 0809 910 to assist in the implementation and establishment of the NBN company, which does seem, even for finance, a bit rich, but we can pursue that with finance as to why they would need 1.1 million for this company. Thank you. That's the... No, of course not, nor could I suppose, but that was the 1.1 million to which I referred.
It also explains why we couldn't find it in our...
Yeah.
So it's a relief. Thank
Sure.
you. Senator.
Thanks.
Senator Nash.
Thanks very much, Chair. I might just, before I resume my questions that I was asking before, I just wanted to ask, and I understand that we're not quite sure where this fits, about the issue of the proposed broadband network and it being able to deliver exhibition quality digital content to remote, rural and regional cinemas and exhibition venues. That's something that...
That could be an arts program. I'm just guessing. I am familiar with an initiative that has digitised some cinemas. I'm not sure it's funded within my department, so I'm guessing it could be an arts issue rather than a...
It may well be. It was just that I was specifically asked in context, will the new NBN be able to deliver the same platform to the cinemas?
It's planned to go to premises. It's homes and premises.
Okay, if I just... If you could, that'd be great. And I think there are some questions around compatibility, whether or not the systems that they currently have in place, they're obviously carried on the network in a particular way, and some concerns around it being able to be compliant with the new proposed network. So if I could get you to take those on notice, and I will actually give you some more detailed questions on notice that might assist. Now, just back to the issue of the NBN again. Recently at the ATUG conference, I think Graham Samuels was talking about competition and saying that in his view, the NBN was an ideal opportunity to readdress competition policy in the telecommunications industry. Minister, what's your understanding of what he meant by that?
Oh, look, I would probably have to get you his entire speech, but I'm sure that if you'd like to come and ask him what he meant by that, I shouldn't put words in his mouth, and I've tried to avoid doing that. He will be at Senate estimates not next week, but I think the following week or the week after. But I've made the point myself on a number of occasions.
I hope we're not here for a month, Minister. Sorry.
I've made the point on a number of occasions. I believe that this decision not only has its value in the ability to transform the economy in a direct sense, but that it's addressing a policy failing over the past two governments, which was the decision not to deal with this structural issue. And I'm back over two governments. So I suspect he could be alluding to that, but I wouldn't want to put words in his mouth.
All right.
But I have made that comment publicly on a number of occasions.
Oh, okay. And with this network, you're obviously confident that those competition issues are going to be addressed?
Oh, look, very confident. We will legislate to create a wholesale-only open access network, and we believe that will address those structural issues that the previous government failed to address, and the previous government for that helped create.
Okay. Does that mean if there's no, and just if this has already been covered, please just tell me and I'll stop talking. That then obviously means if there wasn't a change in the current arrangements in terms of the infrastructure, that you're quite prepared to overbuild. I'll put it another way, to have a second infrastructure network in place.
That is exactly what we're doing with this black spots program. We are building where there is only one pipe to these centres. That is exactly what we're doing. Now, we're offering the opportunity for any incumbent telco, whether it be Telstra or whether it be Optus or NextGen or any of the other companies that have their own fibre networks, to vend their asset in, but they will not own and control the company.
Okay. In the event of, and and if I'm straying to areas you can't talk about, I understand, but in the event of one of those companies perhaps owning 49%, if you eventually sell down, as you say is possible from 5 years' time, aren't you then creating a scenario where perhaps an owner of the infrastructure will own, well, potentially at least nearly half of it immediately, and we'll be right back where we started?
Look,
I
note you're possibly referring to an article that appeared in the papers a little while ago, which unfortunately was wrong in a couple of aspects.
I actually wasn't referring to an article. I'm just talking about the general principle of any carrier, and I'm not even being specific about carriers.
Let me assure you, or reassure you, that we will not recreate the old problem. If we have our network competing with any of the incumbent networks, by definition, there is still competition. If one company, let's call it XYZ Proprietary Limited, decide they want to vend in their assets, the maximum stake that we've indicated that a collective of companies can take is 49%. If the company was a vertically integrated supplier, there would be a cap on the amount of shares that they would be entitled to if they vended their assets in.
Okay.
So there is the figure you've seen most quoted, though there is no final decision, and the implementation study is examining these very issues. But let's say the sort of figures that have been picked around 15 to 20%. So if XYZ company was a vertically integrated monopoly or former monopoly, and it wanted to vend in its current structure, it would be allowed 20%, 15, 20%. If in the future any company changed its structure, then it's possible that we could consider a changed set of circumstances. Possible. All of this is subject to ongoing discussion and implementation study. What would not be allowed to happen in the future is that a retail arm would be allowed to buy into the company when we sold the other 51%.
Okay. How do you stop that happening?
We'll make that. It's a legislated wholesale only.
That's my point. You can have legislation changing. So
I appreciate that. That is always a danger. All we can do is say, if you re-elect a Labor government and the National Party have the balance of power, that can't change.
It's a little presumptive, Minister.
But
don't worry, I'm not.
But no, we intend to legislate it quite seriously. If a future Parliament chooses to change that, well, be it on its head to not learn from. As I say, if you don't learn from your past mistakes, you will do them over and over again. But certainly, from our perspective, this is absolutely specifically going to be designed to not recreate former mistakes. We do not want to revisit what we believe has been a policy failure, and the market, we believe, bears that out at the moment.
Okay. Now, in terms of just general shareholding in how the company's going to run, and obviously the creation of the infrastructure, which will then need obviously ongoing maintenance and indeed ongoing upgrading. It will be like a highway that over the years you're going to have to upgrade and put on new applications.
You've got a
retail
things.
How at that point, when you potentially, hypothetically, will need some sort of upgrade, or there are new applications which are going to be required, how do you then marry up the competing interests of what will then be the shareholding component with the needs to actually... hang on, let me finish. I think this is quite important. With the need to actually improve the infrastructure, which has been an issue in the past.
Two issues. Firstly, because it's a wholesale-only network, it won't be driven by the sorts of things that have stymied serious development in this country under the existing regime. I mean, there have been... The regulatory structure has actually worked against the upgrade. I mean, let's be clear about this. We have not got decent broadband in this country because of a failing of the existing regulatory structure. And that's why we believe we need to fundamentally reform the regulatory structure, which is part of a paper that accompanied the NBN proposal. So we believe that we need to fundamentally change the regulatory structure. We believe that the proposal that we're putting forward in terms of vending assets in can potentially create that structural change in the marketplace, and we intend to legislate as strongly as we can and welcome any suggestions on that about how we ensure that it stays in the current structure. So I think the failure to address the structure of the existing market, which is what has driven us to the paucity of broadband that we have, because we've had this constant problem where the wholesale arm has been dictated to by the retail arm. And so it's not been in the incentive of the wholesale arm. And in fact, if you look at the current structure, the wholesale division of the incumbent has been gutted over the last few years. Whereas the wholesale arm, it will be in its own interests to continue to expand and upgrade. That's the fundamental. That separation creates them operating in a commercially sensible manner, as opposed, so it'll have no conflicting board on top of it, no conflicting retail arm saying, no, we don't want you to wholesale, we don't want you to provide innovation, and we don't want you to do these things. We're going to squeeze every last cent out of the existing copper.
You're not saying that's happened,
Sorry, I've got some questions just
and
on
I've
the
only,
regulatory issues as well.
And I've only got just a couple more, so if you want to hop in, and then I've just got a couple more on different issues, and then I promise I'll put over here.
It was on the same issue.
You know, no, that's what I'm saying, Nick. I said, please do.
Well, it was just quickly on this issue, because I think Senator Nash quite rightly identifies this issue of, which bedevils all infrastructure, incentive to invest in upgrading and maintaining the quality of the network. And that's largely a function of the regulated return on the asset. And you know, I'm not wanting to get into it, but you know, one of the arguments in relation to Telstra is that there is insufficient incentive to invest in the infrastructure because of the regulated return. But presumably you'll have a regulated rate of return on this, and the trick will be to ensure that it is sufficient to give this company the incentive to continue to invest in its network.
Oh, look, absolutely. This company has to make a commercial rate of return for its shareholders. And I think in all infrastructure sectors there's always a robust debate between the regulator and the regulated entity, whether it's electricity, gas or water. We've managed to see, despite the many long and loud public pronouncements, upgrading and ongoing improvements in those sectors. But the twin effect of that debate, combined with the current structure, I think has pushed it in the wrong direction, and we haven't seen those upgrades actually turn up at all after, you know, after many years of arguing backwards and forwards, claim and counterclaim. We've actually seen no serious progress. So I think it's that change in the market structure that will bring us into alignment with the other utility-style arguments, which ultimately get resolved, as opposed to this structure, which has not been resolved until this government's decided to take the steps that it has taken. So I think the regulated rate of return argument is a legitimate argument. It will always be the case between a regulated entity and the regulator. But what's gone wrong in the current structure is that there's been an added incentive to actually not want to upgrade, even if you could get a reasonable rate. I mean, I think that's just I think economic text would probably lean into making that argument as well. So there's a double whammy effect, if you like. You'll always get that argument between a regulator and the regulated entity.
And I just really do just have a couple of quick ones, Chair.
On the same issue?
No, different issue.
Because Senator Lundy has questions on the regulatory thing as well.
Do
just a
you
couple.
need to go to another committee?
I do. I've literally only got two really quick ones, if that's okay. Thanks. One is just around the issue of wireless and the rollout for that last 10%. What work or what modelling is being done to ensure that the spectrum's going to be able to be there to support it?
No, I mean, I think you correctly identified the major flaw in previous government policy. look, it's not for me to say how. I think the sector's learnt from that mistake, and I think that there's a lot more thought being put in within the actual sector about how to approach the government on this issue. I think if you were to go and talk with a variety of wireless producers, you'd actually find that they're taking a different approach than they did perhaps previously. And I think ultimately, if I was in Ozstar's position, I'd be pretty happy at the moment.
Okay. So, but I mean, purely from the delivery point of view, not necessarily the carriers and what they're going to do, but purely from the delivery point of view, that in whatever form, however it's going to be rolled out, that the spectrum is going to, there's enough spectrum there that's going to be able to support the amount of wireless capacity that you're talking about rolling out.
Look, I believe that a number of attractive proposals will be put to government, but I think there's some information in the regulatory paper that might be relevant here as well.
Senator, on page 26 of the regulatory paper of this Blue Book, there's a section on spectrum allocation, and it talks about over the coming years the government's going to be considering the allocation of spectrum, and it goes on to comment about the need for the government to have spectrum to be available for the purposes of next generation, the long-term evolution phase of.
Can I just ask, Minister, when's the is it 2013 you have to make the determination about reissuing the spectrum?
In terms of the digital switchover, 2013 is when the final metro areas are switched over.
No. Sorry. I'm probably not using the right terminology here.
On individual existing telco
on the
spectrum,
existing
there's a range of them, I think, and Keith or Renton are here. I think there's a rolling. They start in 2013 and go through to 2015, but I think both the officers coming to the table.
And I'm very happy for them to take
very
it on
quickly
notice.
tell you the answer to that question.
Oh, okay.
Brendan Thomas, Assistant Secretary, Network Operations and Spectrum Branch. There's a series of licences coming due between 2013 and 2017. They include the major 2G and 3G licences for Telstra, for Optus, for Vodafone. They're all coming up for renewal. The government's currently, or the department has recently issued a discussion paper seeking views on how the renewal or reissue process might occur. The government will be considering the responses to that discussion paper, and then we'll be providing some advice to the Minister later in the year.
Okay. And just quickly on that, how do you determine the criteria of public good, if you like, in terms of the Minister making a determination?
Yes. Well, that's a very important question. As you're probably aware, the legislation allows for renewal of licences either by ACMA or by the Minister in the public interest. There is very little indication in the legislation as to how that public interest might be structured. So what we have done is we've gone out with a discussion paper raising 5 potential public interest criteria, and we'll be seeking comments on each of those 5 criteria. The criteria go to issues such as competition, disruption to consumers, highest value use for the spectrum, and one of the other criteria is an appropriate rate of return to the community for the actual spectrum itself.
And Senator, on page 27 of this report, there's a question to the public and to stakeholders. Given the changes in the telecommunication industry resulting from the rollout of the national broadband network, are competition restrictions necessary to limit access to the valuable spectrum? So the issue that you're effectively canvassing of how to ensure the public good gets protected when clearly the government's also interested in maximising productivity and value from spectrum use and sometimes protecting the industry, how can you match all those roles? That is canvassed in the paper, and I'm expecting people to reply to that by the 3rd of June. Okay, great, thank you. And one last question, which I'm happy to take for you to take on notice, because I am very mindful. Mrs. Smith in her house has 100 megabits under the new system, and Mrs. Jones in her house has 12. What are the differences in what they're going to get? What will they get? What won't they get? What can they do? What can't they do? And what are the limitations?
As I'm sure you're aware, our election commitment was to deliver 12 meg to 98% of Australians. We're now going to be able to meet that for 100% of Australians. As you'd be, I think, I'm not sure if you're here, Senator Nash, when I was talking with Senator Fisher, the Tasmanian Premier indicated that because of the configuration of the network, he believed we'd be able to reach homes with, be able to reach communities of down to as low as 50 people. Now, Tasmania is a smaller state, obviously. So the configuration of the network is critical. In terms of fibre to the home, one of the key issues is the distance that is from a splitter that you can.
I think you're probably giving me far too much information, Minister. All I need is a comparative list.
This is important just so you understand the thinking of the government.
It's going to take more than a few minutes in here.
No, it won't, I promise. So the splitter at the moment, most splitters that are on the market at the moment can transmit 20 kilometres. So you build to a point, put a splitter down, and it can go to 32 or 64 homes. And at the moment, it can be 20 kilometres from that splitter. The latest generation of splitters, which will be available later this year, reach 60 kilometres from the home, from the splitter to a home. So I think that will transform a lot of the debate.
Oh, absolutely, and I understand. And living in a regional area, I know there are simply places where you cannot get fibre to the premises.
And I appreciate you've never actually suggested otherwise.
I have never suggested other. I'm just simply trying to get an understanding because people are asking me, what's the difference if I've got 100 or if I've got 12? So I think it's just a very, Minister, it's just a very simple list. If it could be provided for the committee, that's all.
We've targeted the minimum sort of capacity that we believe needs to be delivered as far high definition video conferencing. Yep. And that's the base application that we want, because we believe that's what's going to be a overwhelming part of the net in the future.
Which Mrs Smith will be using a lot, I'm sure, Fiona.
I actually have a bit of faith in Mrs Smith.
I've got a bit of faith in Mrs Smith too, actually.
She'll want to do more than download movies, Senator Nash, I'm sure you would agree. We're designing a system to try and ensure that future applications, and so you're asking me a question to predict the future in terms of what the individual applications are, which I'm not sure myself or the department are actually able to do.
I'm not asking that at all, Minister. I don't
we believe the sort of medical applications, the educational applications that are available at the moment will be able to be delivered over this network. And it's important that you also understand that while, again, as always, and Mary Jo was having a bit of fun with me earlier about talking about only preaching about the minimums, one of the requirements from our perspective is an upgrade pathway. So this is not a permanent outcome. I was somewhat critical of the Opel project on the basis that it was a old technology that had no upgrade pathway. It had no spectrum as well, which you will understand. But it was an old technology that you couldn't use this laptop to. It was D standard. This is E standard, and there's the new M standard coming. And the new M standard. So I've said what I'm saying to wireless operators and to satellite operators: show me your future upgrade paths, because it isn't good enough. Ultimately, long-term down the track, despite Senator Minchin's scepticism, to leave people on 12 megs. So we're actually building in upgrade paths. These can be done now, this is where the next generation satellites will absolutely be able to do this, but even existing satellites can do this. You can actually upgrade the software in the box via a download. And so you can have a software, you buy the box to receive your satellite transmission at the moment, and you can actually get a download of software that actually transforms the capacity of the box. So what we're talking to satellite and wireless producers about is that upgrade pathway, because ultimately 12 megs will not be enough. And I've never ever tried to suggest it would be. We always said this is the minimums. So the sort of upgrade pathways that satellite are talking about, 30 megs. And the upgrade pathway for some of the wireless technologies are 50 and 70, long-term evolution, or 4G, as WiMAX has adopted the title 4G, even though you think 3G actually goes next to 4G. No, it's 3G to LTE, WiMAX becoming 4G, WiMAX. So those upgrade pathways are critical, because no one should be left on 12 megs long term.
Thanks.
So I hope that gives you an idea of the thinking behind the government strategy.
It does assist, Minister, absolutely. And Ms Scott, I do hope I will still get my list. Thank you very much for your indulgence,
Senator
Chair.
Lundy on regulatory reform.
Thank you. I just want to go back to how the government reached the view that the NBN should be a wholesale-only network. Sorry. I just wanted to go back to some of the fundamentals about the regulatory structure and ask what was it that led the government to deciding that the NBN needed to be a wholesale-only network?
Yeah. Look, as I mentioned earlier, thank you for that, Senator Lundy. The rollout of the NBN is a wholesale-only access network that we believe will fundamentally transform the competitive dynamics of Australia's telco sector. However, during the rollout, the existing regulatory regime will remain important for delivering services in the interest of Australian consumers and businesses.
That was one of my other questions, because I know that with the regulatory paper that you've now got out there that you're not waiting for the NBN.
No, that's right. Last year we publicly consulted industry and key stakeholders on the effectiveness of the existing regulatory regime. We got 82 submissions in response, and they overwhelmingly, every single one of them, were unhappy with the existing regime, but they overwhelmingly argue that the current regime does not work effectively to achieve its goals. That is why a core element of our historic NBN announcement involves reform of the existing regime to make it work more effectively.
So with the existing operational separation regime, what's the view
Look, it's
about its
completely
capacity
failed.
of promoting equivalence or delivering equivalence?
There is nobody who believes the existing regime works satisfactorily. That's the total regulatory regime. In terms of operational separation, as you know, Senator Lundy, I think you sat with me when we voted against the existing operational separation regime. It is a monumental waste of money for both Telstra as well as the broader community. So we've said consistently that we would need a tougher regime if we didn't get a satisfactory result out of our RFP process. Now, while we've moved to a satisfactory result in terms of the government policy, the RFP resolved ultimately nothing. And so that is why we believe we need both the NBN proposal by the government and to change the existing regulatory structure.
So remind me when the last time parts 11B and 11C of the Trade Practices Act were actually reformed?
Thanks, Mr. Lyons. You got me there, Senator.
There have actually been no fundamental changes. It was introduced in 1997. There was a review of Part 11B and Part 11C undertaken by the Productivity Commission, and I think it reported in 2001. And as a result of that, there were, this was under the previous government, there were some streamlining of the processes under the access regime in 2001, and there have been changes to accounting separation and operational separation arrangements in 2002 and 2005. But the last big review was by the Productivity Commission, and the substance of the current regime has been in place since 1997. There's been refinements, and the regulatory discussion paper that's been released has probably floated much more significant options for reform.
So it's essentially been 11 years since it's been put in place with no major
Without a major
change.
overhaul, I think that'd be correct. So.
Minister, what are the ACCC's views, or are you aware of their views in relation to the proposed regulatory structure?
Look, we have had a little bit of a discussion about that, and I know Senator Minchin is particularly keen to hear the ACCC's views. On the proposed structure of the NBN as a wholesale-only network, Mr Samuel emphasised the important opportunity the announcement provided to address long-standing structural issues in the sector. And he said at the recent ATUG conference, and I quote, "Structural separation will mean the NBN operator has a clear incentive to treat access seekers on an equivalent basis. Therefore, the government's announcement provides an opportunity to deal head-on with the difficulties arising from the vertical integration of the incumbents." On the existing regime, Mr Samuel has made it very clear arrangements that are put in place in the transition to the NBN will be fundamental to enhancing competition in the Australian telco industry in the short to medium term. The ACCC has noted that since 1997, the ACCC has been notified of a total of 157 telco access disputes. This is in stark contrast to the 3 access disputes that have been notified to the ACCC across all other sectors of the economy.
So, I'll ask the next obvious question. What's your understanding of the views of the coalition in relation to
Look, it's interesting. The previous government did privatise Telstra without ever failing to effectively resolve the inherent conflict of the network owner also competing against customers in downstream retail markets. I mean, they were very big at talking about the conflict between the government regulating and ownership, but they completely ignored this inherent conflict. The opposition did, to be fair, appear to have a brief epiphany on the issue last year when my previous Shadow Minister, Mr Bilston, was quoted in Comms Day calling for the NBN to be structurally separated so that it could not remonopolise the telco industry. Of course, this position was shut down when Senator Minchin took over the shadow portfolio. Senator Minchin appears to be one of the few people left in the debate who oppose a wholesale-only network to drive genuine competitive pressure in the Australian telco sector. It's very disappointing.
So I hear. Thank you for that explanation, Minister. I think it helps put this whole debate in the appropriate political context. On that note, I'll finish my question.
Thank you, Senator Lundy. Senator Minchin.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just wanted to touch on the commercial issues surrounding the NBN Co. It will, I presume, actually be required to operate commercially.
That's correct, Senator.
And we would. Can you tell me, Ms Scott, whether the department's collected evidence as to whether this government-owned NBN Co will be able to operate commercially?
We have done some preliminary analysis on that issue, but clearly the implementation study will look at all those issues, and as you know, we've already gone out for the lead advisor for the implementation study.
Well, can I say on that, I have in front of me the issues to be examined by the implementation study, and it doesn't actually, well, you can point it out to me, but I can't see any of these dot points on page 43. Oh, well, sorry, I'm using the Select Committee on the National Broadband Network as my source, but it refers to the issues to be examined by the implementation study and then lists them. Sorry, it's for convenience. This is but it doesn't list anywhere, on the basis of the document in front of me, the issue of commercial viability. Has stand to be corrected. I mean, it's the legislation, the regulatory regime, ownership restrictions, funding requirements, development is to maximise private ownership, capital structure. Which one of those would be the head that would go to the commercial viability of the company?
Well, it does refer to government's objectives, and the government has made it clear that it's required to be commercial. We've also in 34.3, development of strategies to maximise the scope for private sector investment in the network company. So we anticipate that in order to attract private investment, it would need to be commercial. It is.
You think it's implicit in there, do you?
I think all of those go implicitly to it, and it also, in the next clause, says the list outlined is clause 36.3. 36.3, is that a typo? Is not exhaustive but indicative. So I'm assuming that's a typo.
34.3 there.
Yeah, that should be 34.3. 34.3 is not exhaustive but indicative of the breadth.
But certainly the government.
I think there's actually a typo there that may have added to your.
And I'll just see if I can find you another part of the paper. But there is a section where it talks about refers to the government's statements in the public domain, and certainly the government's been clear at the outset that its desire for the project to be commercial and for the project ultimately to be privatised. So
Yeah, I'll believe that when I see it. Okay, so you think you're satisfied that, at least implicitly in the elements of the implementation study is the issue of commercial viability?
Yes, I do, Senator.
So does that mean the implementation study will be the one that, rather than the department itself, that will do work on what prices
Correct.
to consumers will be required to ensure this is viable? I'm not going to the prices, but someone's got to actually examine if this is going to be viable.
Let's just try and go back a step, because unfortunately you've made the same error that Mr Turnbull made. This is a wholesale company. It doesn't go to retail consumers. It's prices for the ISPs. They're its customers, not retail consumers. Now, the wholesale price will ultimately impact on the retail prices.
Well, of course.
But it's not designing prices for retail customers. It designs its pricing structure for wholesale ISPs.
So,
and this is something that I don't think I've heard you say it before, which is why I'm just wanting to make sure that I correct you early, because Mr Turnbull's been talking about it, a whole range of analysts have been talking about it, and it's just frankly incoherent.
Well, it's not incoherent.
Yes, it is incoherent to say that the NBN will be setting retail prices. It won't be. It will have an influence through a wholesale pricing structure.
I was going to say, the retail price will be a function of the wholesale price it charges.
And the ultimate price to consumers will be a function of the competitive dynamics that are created by having a wholesale-only open access network.
Yeah, but no one's going
so the competitive pressures that will exist in the future, by definition, are greater than happen today.
Well, that depends on whether the retailers want to migrate their customers onto it, and that'll depend on the wholesale price. So will this implementation study then be doing the work on the sort of wholesale pricing that will be required to ensure a commercial return, and that you satisfy the government's objectives for commerciality, will it?
Yes.
Yes.
Right.
Not a retail price.
Is it a premise of this exercise that the wholesale fixed-line prices will be uniform across the network, cities and country?
There'll be equivalent offerings. How a retailer then chooses to take the offering, and the point I'm trying to make is that there could be differing retail prices.
Yeah, I asked Joe about wholesale pricing.
Yeah. The intention is certainly, as with ATM bank fees, as with Australia Post stamp, that there be a uniform wholesale price. There'll be the usual commercial volume discounts. All of those sorts of issues will come into play. But certainly the government will be seeking to ensure that Australians who live in regional rural Australia is a fair and equivalent price. But those matters are matters for the implementation study, with a view to the government's perspective.
Well, it's open to the government to stipulate that the basis of operation of this will be a wholesale price that is uniform across.
Look, banks manage to operate with
I accept that there'll be differences in retail.
Banks manage to operate a uniform price for ATMs across the country, despite their geographic location. Costs the
asking you whether
costs
it is
the same to use the network.
Yeah, no, I'm asking you, is that
trying to
a mandate that the company will have, and that the implementation study will be based on, that wholesale prices will be uniform across the network, the city and country?
Certainly the government's view.
Certainly the government's view.
Yep.
But is that a commitment?
That sounds a little vague, Senator
No, nothing
Conroy.
vague about it.
You might want to...
The NBN, FTTN had that as an objective, and we believe that we're being consistent with that.
So we take it that that is the mandate of the company. Okay, that's fine. Thank you. Can you guarantee that wholesale fixed line prices will be no higher than they currently are on this new network?
Well, that's why we're having an implementation study, but international evidence as well as domestic evidence shows that it is possible. Currently, Internode offer 100 meg at $100 fibre to the home here in Australia today. If you look at the Singapore transition that's taking place, and you may say, well, Singapore market compared to ours is different. That's not the relevant comparison. It's the Singapore fibre to the home versus the Singapore existing network that you make the comparison on. And there's a $15 reduction in wholesale prices based on the new network against the old network. So I think if you look around the world, you'll find the offerings that are being made in France and the US are all very competitive under the new fibre to the home proposals that exist. And as you've twigged, and I'm sure you may help inform some of the debate in future, calculations that say you need 5 million customers to service $43 billion, therefore you need $215 at a 15% rate of return, plus a series of other dodgy assumptions. I can't say I'm pleased that you've terminated Mr Ergas in doing your tax review. I think that's such a sensible
I'm not sure
decision.
that's correct, but I wouldn't use this to cast slurs upon one of Australia's most eminent economists, whatever your differences of opinion with him.
Mr Hockey's indicated that the project's not going ahead that he was hired for. And I'm just congratulating you on that wise decision.
Well, I wouldn't cast aspersions upon
Mr Ergas made a string of completely questionable assumptions. He assumed 15% rate of return. Neither Telstra nor the G9 proposal were shooting in that ballpark. He then made an assumption about the...
I don't want to spend all night talking about what various people say will be the retail price.
These things need to be made clear, Senator Minchin, and I know you're interested in making sure that information is accurately represented. He then made an assumption about a 20-year lifespan for the product. Telstra have a 30, sometimes 35-year lifespan calculation based into their assumptions. So why Mr Ergas, who is very familiar with Telstra's network architecture and assumptions, wanted to make such conservative assumptions, I can only invite you to ask him. But the sort of retail price that he came up with was based on a string of very, very
he's not the only one who thinks that inevitably
very, very incorrect assumptions.
Pricing must increase. And that's what intrigues me.
It's just tragically around the world that's not been the case, but Mr Ergas was able to construct a fiction that got him there.
How is it possible that you could spend $43 billion and have to get a commercial rate of return on it?
Well, I think
I think the problem with
price increases. I think the problem with your line of questions that you've got is ignoring the evidence that you received earlier about the $43 billion figure. Turn it to that mention.
No, I'm not. You're still investing $43 billion by the time this thing is fully operational. And you need to get a return on it. So it's going to have to earn.
That is not the case, Senator Minchin. You can make that assertion, but you know it not to be the case. We've also indicated, and we believe, that there is genuine private sector interest in investing in this company. Now, I'm not talking about merchant banks.
That's
commercial rate of return.
That's irrelevant to the rate of return the company's got to earn.
The rate of return that those numbers are based on is the total build cost of $43 billion. And what I'm saying is the total build does not necessarily, and we don't believe it will be, $43 billion, because we believe there is genuine interest. So it's a rate of return based on a $43 billion figure that doesn't exist. It's just
but even if people vend in assets, they need a return on those assets.
And they'll get a return on those assets. But this is a calculation based on a dollar figure of $43 billion. And when
so
you
we don't know
whether
wholesale prices will be higher or lower, but we'll find out.
No, the wholesale prices on international experience and experience here in Australia are that they'll be lower. And I can quote to you Matt Healy from Matt Healy from Macquarie Telecom, who's made it clear that he believes prices will be lower. I can quote to you from
at least half a dozen people who think prices will be a lot higher and unaffordable.
I can quote to you from Optus spokespeople who believe that competition will drive prices down lower than they currently are. So I prefer to believe the practitioners in the market.
Of course you do.
The practitioners in the market who know something about
including AAP too, who think it's going to be $200 a month as well.
That was based on, it wasn't based on any calculations. Mr Broad just made up a number in the first 24 hours.
Oh, right.
It couldn't have been based on any anything other than a $43 billion figure.
Mr Ergas, Mr Broad, any more you'd like to have a go? That's enough for now, okay. Can I ask
I'm happy to keep going, Senator Minchin.
Can I ask if it's assumed that the company will be profitable immediately, or is it going to be assumed that it'll be making losses in the first few years of its operations?
Sorry,
is that...
Sorry, I missed that question, Senator Minchin, if you could repeat it.
Your assumptions about this company and your investment and your establishment of it, have you got to the point of knowing whether you're assuming it'll be profitable from the outset, or that you're building into all your assumptions losses, at least in the first few years?
That will be a matter that is considered by the implementation study.
Okay, I don't see that there, but I take your word for it. Just in terms of the... you talked about vending in and shareholders and construction, and you've referred very favourably to your panel tonight. I'd just be interested in your reaction to one of your panel members, Professor Cootes, who said, and I quote, "I think you have to say that it's the hypothetical fool's experiment to imagine that this, that is the NBN, is going to happen without Telstra somehow being involved. Telstra is part of the Australian infrastructure and they have to be part of the solution." Is that a statement with which you'd agree? Or?
Look, it's certainly a statement that you've advocated already tonight, notwithstanding that you ran your own competitive process in the face of it. But look, Mr. Professor Cootes is one of Australia's...
I think I probably would agree with Professor Cootes. I'm wondering
I'm sure you would. Professor Cootes is one of Australia's foremost wireless...
Very wise.
...wireless experts. And I value his views and the role that he played in the expert panel. But what Mr Cootes also said, which you don't want to quote, is that I'm keen essentially to do whatever we can to explain to people that finally we have a vision going forward of how this country is going to get a broadband infrastructure that positions us for the 21st century. Now, as I said, we have invited...
I accept that he supports what you're doing, but and you quote him favourably. I want to know whether you agree with him on the issue of the essentiality of...
Unlike you, who apparently engaged in a scam on the Australian public when you, in your last role in government...
Scam on the Australian public?
Yeah, you actually engaged in a expert panel reviewing 5 of the no proposals. And as I quoted earlier, but you yourself remain convinced there was no need to do that because only one country could. We actually believe that it is possible to build this network, and we've said we're prepared to invest up to $43 billion to ensure it happens. Now, we don't believe...
So you disagree with Professor Cootes?
Yes.
No. You disagree with him? You don't think it requires Telstra's involvement?
We did not engage in a scam like you did in the previous government.
I just want to know whether you agree or disagree with Professor Cootes.
So we have invited private sector participation, including from Telstra, and we would welcome it from Telstra as we would welcome it from all the other private sector operators.
Do you agree or disagree with Professor Cootes?
I think I've made it clear
you
don't agree with
right. Just
Professor Cootes on this one.
Senator Lundy touched on the regulatory framework, and it's just I think you're developing a regulatory framework for the NBN itself as a separate exercise, as I understand it.
Sorry? I'm trying to understand what...
Just remind me, you're developing as a separate exercise the proposed regulatory framework for the NBN. Can you assure the Parliament and the community and the industry, I suppose, that essentially this is going to be bound by the same competition and regulatory framework as other infrastructure providers? Because I assume you're not contemplating this as, well, it won't be a monopoly provider. I mean, one of the big questions is, I guess, what happens to the existing infrastructure? And I don't know that either you or anybody else has an answer to that particularly, but you do contemplate, I assume, that there will be infrastructure competition. And I'd just like an assurance that, and of course, this is why I personally don't agree with government-owned companies, because you get into this problem, but that there will be, in a sense, regulatory neutrality surrounding this company. It'll be treated exactly the same way from a regulatory competition point of view as any other broadband infrastructure provider.
There's a fulsome explanation, Senator, of the government's proposition on the regulatory regime set out in the discussion paper. I don't think I can probably summarise it effectively, but draw your attention to it.
Which pages?
Well, probably
Well,
the
it's sort of
chapter.
Chapter 2.
Chapter 1, and then a chapter going on to chapter 2. So.
Well, I'm just asking for a confirmation that this whole exercise is premised on regulatory neutrality.
Our position is set out in the discussion paper, Senator.
Well, it's a real bureaucratic non-answer, but really, you can do better than that.
Our position is set out quite clearly.
Well, why don't you summarise it in one sentence for me?
I can start reading it to you if you like.
Just give me an answer to that question. Yes or no to
our position is
regulatory neutrality.
Our
Can't
position
answer
is
it.
set out in the regulatory paper.
Can you assure us that other infrastructure providers won't be restricted in any way from upgrading or improving their services to customers in competition with this NBN?
The government's position is set out quite clearly in the regulatory paper, and we're considering a range of issues that will arise from the responses to the regulatory paper.
Yep.
Senator Minchin.
You're hiding behind a 57-page document.
Now, Minister, at least last year and the estimates since then up till now, when we've hit these sorts of points of you wishing to refer us to documents, and usually it was the RFP process at that stage. You kindly, almost mind-numbingly, had officers read extracts of the RFP to us,
and we're prepared to invite him to the table to read you the regulatory paper if you'd like.
What would be useful, I'm sure, if you're going to simply refer to the regulatory paper, would be to actually refer more precisely to the regulatory paper than you're doing.
Yeah, just point out the one sentence where it says,
Point out in one sentence.
Jealous.
I thought Ms Scott actually made a genuine effort, and she actually suggested it wouldn't be possible easily to summarise the first two chapters of the paper. I thought she actually made that point to you. So your response is, well, give it to us in one sentence. Give it to us. No, Senator Birmingham just asked to give it to us in one sentence or point to it.
No, my simple question on just guaranteeing regulatory neutrality with other infrastructure providers.
Start at the top, read to the end.
Simple, pretty simple question.
Seeing if there's any further information in the paper we can give you.
The Chapter 2 talks about the regulatory environment for the National Broadband Network. It refers to the Australian Government announcement to establish a company that will invest up to $43 billion over 8 years to build and operate the network, and talks about the technologies used to deliver it. It says that the Government's National Broadband Network Initiative has been informed by reports of the panel of experts in our CCC on proposals received, as well as assessments conducted by the Attorney General's Department and other departments. Importantly, it's been informed by stakeholder views. It then goes on to say, to facilitate the rollout of the National Broadband Network, the Government will establish a company to build and operate the network on a commercial basis. The Government will introduce legislation for the National Broadband Network Company that establishes governance, ownership and operating arrangements for the wholesale-only company.
To interrupt you, Mr Lyons, I've read all that. I know all that, but what worries me is it's written as though this is the only infrastructure provider. There does seem, and I've read this probably a couple of times, there seems to be no reference to a clear statement of the government's objective of ensuring regulatory neutrality between this infrastructure provider and other infrastructure providers. I put to you that is an omission, and I mean, you can take it on notice, but I would like, and I think the community and the industry would like, an assurance that is in fact the case. And I do think, with respect, this is a deficiency in this, that it's written as though this is a new monopoly. Now, maybe that is the government's objective. I would hope not. But can I also, the minister's out of the room, but you may be able to help me. I'd also like an assurance that this new company will compete on a level playing field with other infrastructure providers for government business. Again, my concern being this is regrettably another government company where the government has a vested interest in its profitability and in acquiring customers, including the government. So I'd like that assurance. Take that on notice. But
well, certainly it's indicated that it will operate on a commercial basis.
Yeah, but
and I'll take on notice the rest of what you said.
I was making the point, Senator Conroy, that I appreciate your government has a different view. I mean, I'm pleased you've at least set the objective of privatising this in the year 2023, which is going to be quite a year for Australia. With a big sale of NBN Co. and you and I getting the pension, but...
You speak for yourself. You speak for yourself.
Oh, you look just as old as me. I'm sorry, Senator Conroy. Didn't realise you were so much younger.
I'll be getting a telegram from the...
Well, you won't be, I'm afraid, because we'll be a republic by then. Senators are close. But
you will quickly find that you have a conflict of interest inherent in your responsibilities and that of your joint shareholder, the Minister for Finance, who will be wanting to maximise the profits of this business while you act as the regulator for this and other providers. But I just...
There wasn't after denying it all those years in
government. No. It was the main reason I went around the country in the face of a Labor storm advocating the sale of Telstra because of that dreadful conflict of interest. And this is, I mean, it is, to be frank, it is the problem when you part sell an entity. And the problem
why didn't you sell Australia Post then?
Well, I'll talk to you about that some other time. No.
When Senator Nash isn't listening.
No, it is not coalition policy to sell Australia Post. Let me place it on the record.
Sounds like you want it to be, though, Senator Minchin.
Not coalition policy to sell Australia Post.
Those damn agrarian socialists.
But I make the point that the worst period for the ownership of Telstra was when we had 51% of it in government hands and 49% in private hands, and you are setting out to have a structure of that kind. And I think that is risky, but I just sought an assurance in your absence that this company will operate on a level playing field when it comes to other providers and government business, that you can assure us that this company, that the government buying access to a wholesale provider will show no favouritism whatsoever. I just want a guarantee of a level playing field.
Look, we'll take that one on notice, Senator Minchin.
Can I ask you, in this context, what analysis you've done on the impact on private investment in telecommunications infrastructure in this interregnum? It's something that does concern me and I know is being commented upon, but now that you've announced you're going to spend $43 billion on rolling out optical fibre, why would anyone invest anything in the existing copper network? Why would ISPs spend anything on what could well be, depending on what you do, where it ends up, redundant assets? I mean, it was. We all acknowledge there's a problem with FTTN.
In terms of the
I'd like to know what analysis, without getting the debate of whether or not. I want to know if you are doing analysis of the potential
in terms of the copper
impact on private investment.
In terms of the copper, look, it's well known that Telstra's maintenance alone of its CAN is somewhere between $800 and $1 billion a year. It's got collapsing copper infrastructure across the country. This is particularly the case, and it drowned 12 months ago, it drowned about 4 months ago, and it certainly drowned in the last couple of weeks in Queensland, South East Queensland particularly, and northern New South Wales. The extent of the corrosion of the copper in the ground is dramatic and dire, which is why that $1 billion figure has been around for a while. So I think the problem has been the regulatory structure has actually stopped moving from copper to the next generation network. And that's the nub of where certainly your government considered it was at, and certainly we consider that that's why we need to make the move, because the existing infrastructure is physically collapsing, putting aside the argument for it doesn't have the technological capacity to deliver the next generation of applications that are coming down the track. So I think there are valid reasons to not, chain myself to the copper in the ground.
I don't think that was my question. I'm asking what work has been done.
Sounded like it.
No, I'm asking what work has been done on analysing the risks of essentially a private investment freeze in existing infrastructure in the 8 years that you're spending $43 billion to roll this out.
Look, all I can pass on to you is I won't name the company, but one company has said to me already that when our backhaul gets rolled out to X particular place, they will be investing in DSLAMs to put into the exchanges of those towns that they've not been able to afford to do because of the price of backhaul due to just the one pipe going into those towns. So I've had the exact opposite response over the next 8 years from providers who are saying they believe they can make a return, even for a short period of time, with the DSLAM going into the new areas that we're planning on building a backbone to in the short term.
That's a nice anecdote, but I'm asking you...
Not an anecdote, it's a factual conversation.
Is the department or the implementation study or anybody doing any detailed analysis of the risks of private investment freeze or a dramatic reduction in private investment in telecommunications infrastructure in the period in which you take to roll this out, which will be at least 8 years? It's 2018 before we see this thing. That must be one of the risks to be assessed. I want to know what work who's analysing that risk.
We've had essentially a 5-year capital strike from Telstra, and they announced it.
So let's analysis of that risk.
Let's be clear. The problems with the existing regime that exists now, such as protracted processes under Part 11C, deter competition, genuine competition, from emerging and from carriers and ISPs expanding their presence in the market. That's actually what's happening today, Senator Minchin. That's actually happening.
Just say no. If you're not doing any analysis of that risk, say so. That's
happy to take that on notice.
There's no analysis. Okay.
Happy to take that on notice.
Thank you. The backhaul was touched on. I don't want to go back over that, and I may have missed it because I wasn't. I was a bit distracted. But did you indicate? We know that $250 million you're investing comes out of the 4.7, half of which is being borrowed. So that's NBN Co money, I assume. So presumably ownership of this backhaul infrastructure will vest in NBN Co, will it?
Ultimately, yes.
Ultimately. You mean once it's constructed, it will be? Yeah. Okay. Yes. Well, I appreciate that. Yeah. Okay.
I'm not sure what you were... I was lost in what you were contemplating there, Senator.
It will vest in the company.
Yes.
Right. I appreciate that. I'm just interested, and maybe depreciation was always a tricky area, and Mr. Scott will know. The budget actually provides as an expense commencing in 10-11 for $6.25 million for depreciation associated with this regional backbone black spots program. Do you want to just explain that to me? Yes. I don't think Senator Conroy can, but I'm hoping Ms Scott can. There are always internal debates, I know.
I'm just resting my voice at this stage, Senator Minchin, for what I'm sure will be...
Don't worry, it confused our government too, but I am interested in the requirement for you to expense that amount on depreciation starting in 10-11.
No, I know that you came up with this question.
Because this is the ultimately bit. So why don't you go... Yeah, so just talk about the... do you want to get Simon in, or do you want to handle it yourself? He's got to get written down somewhere.
The figure that you're referring to relates to the depreciation of the backhaul, the backbone assets.
Yeah, that's what I said
right.
to you.
That's what
he was asking us to confirm.
I was asking, why are your department required to expense $6.25 million on depreciation for that. What? That's an accounting standard being applied to you?
That's my understanding.
Because
as it's shown in the budget, the $250 million is investment that the Commonwealth will own, and we've gone out consulting in the consultation paper on the future ownership structure, and the intention is that ultimately it will vend in, but in the event that doesn't happen in the immediate, we needed to expense the depreciation. So it's the assumption made for the purposes of this particular budget paper.
So there may be an adjustment as
That's
and when.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, just in the company.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Simon, did you want to? I mean, I've got more, but I'm happy.
We have got another program to go after 1.1.
Yeah, well, I suspect it's only digital TV and that.
Yeah, well, just remind people that we have got another program.
Can I just touch on this issue of aerial and underground? I don't think we've touched on that. The rollout does contemplate aerial cabling, doesn't it? I think it's specifically set out somewhere that it will involve aerial cabling. Certainly I've seen reference to that.
There'll be aerial and underground.
Yep. Can I ask, for the purposes of the assumption of $43 billion, was there a presumption about proportionality as between underground and aerial? Because I understand the cost difference is substantial. I don't know whether you can give me information on the cost differential, but on a per kilometre basis, but I assume it's quite substantial.
Yeah, look, we're involved in Tasmania, as you know, with some commercial negotiations, and I just would probably prefer to take that on notice at this stage to see if there's any information that I can provide you. We're actually involved in a negotiation at the moment about the rollout in Tasmania.
Yeah, but I'm asking a factual question about the differential between aerial and underground. Can you give me that on a per kilometre basis, I guess? And B, to come up with your $43 billion figure, you must have had to have made a presumption about how much this rollout would be aerial and how much would be underground.
As you know, from your former days as a finance minister, what we did was build in a large contingency into this Senator mission, and that contingency,
great escape clause, the old contingency. It does sound like finance.
Yeah. Exactly. I'm sounding like
you're sounding more
I'm
like
sounding like someone who spent too much time around finance officials, even if they're good Collingwood fans. But a contingency has been built in that covers a number of different issues, but
including the extent to which you have aerial and the aerial extent to which you have underground. That's what you're confirming.
As I said, no, I'm not confirming that. What I'm saying is I'd like to seek some further advice. Right. So I'll take that on notice.
Okay. Are you able to answer that question on the cost differential?
Look, I'd have to take that on notice.
I noticed in the best spin imaginable, the discussion paper, regulatory reform discussion paper, says the government's going to introduce streamlined arrangements for uniform rollout to ensure consumers do not have to wait unnecessarily for services, i.e. everybody else can just get out of the way.
I forgot you were hugging those nodes a couple of days before the announcement.
We'll be very interested when we see that legislation, but I presume that means that the contractors rolling this out will be granted legislatively rights to override the rights of private landholders, councils, etc., in order to effect this rollout. Is that I mean, the flip side of saying, oh, we're going to get it out to consumers, very quickly, is that somebody's rights are abrogated.
Senator, we're already in discussions with local government, and I'm very pleased to say that they have a strong appreciation of the benefits of broadband. The government's working cooperatively with them, looking at the issue of how to streamline arrangements. Clearly, we don't want a national project unnecessarily held up by inconsistent approaches to local rules and regulations. At the moment, there are certain powers and immunities. We'll be looking at those to see how we can not only protect amenity but ensure the fastest rollout possible.
It is the case, is it, that the Commonwealth, under the Telecommunications Power, can legislate in this fashion to override all state and local planning laws?
The Commonwealth has constitutional power.
And that's the presumption there. Under what? The Communications Power?
Sorry?
Under the Communications Power?
Communications Power. I'm just saying it has
the advice to you is that you have the requisite constitutional heads of power
for the issues in the discussion paper, yes.
And there are powers and immunities now, Senators.
Sorry,
there are powers and immunities now.
There's
an existing regime that's long-standing.
Yeah, but this seems to be suggesting you're going to go considerably further than the existing regime.
I don't think I'd characterise it as you have as going, as some sort of drastic or radical change. We're in discussions with local government about this matter.
I note the reference to uniform, but Australia isn't uniform, and there are many local communities that will be violently opposed to aerial cabling. If a community clearly is violently opposed to such aerial cabling, will they be able to have their wishes granted? Or is it your proposition that
that's a hypothetical? That's a hypothetical you're asking us to speculate on.
Aerial cabling is Senator, what it's got to be. It's got to be.
Senator Mitchell, that's a hypothetical you're asking. We're currently engaged in very positive and constructive dialogue with the Local Government Association.
Well, it's not hypothetical. I want to know if a local community wants to be able to reject aerial cabling. If they don't want it, will they be able to?
As I said, you're asking us to speculate at this stage.
No, I'm asking a simple question. This policy seems increasingly undeveloped, I must say, Minister. If you can't answer a basic question like that, clearly this thing was done entirely on the run. But I would appreciate an answer to that question, even if you do take it on notice, but I'm amazed you can't answer it. Local communities all over Australia will be eagerly awaiting your answer. One of your more interesting propositions is to mandate fibre in greenfield estates. And I note, again, you propose legislation to that effect. Again, I presume you're satisfied of the Commonwealth's head of power to do that. It'll be an interesting debate we have on that. Who will that obligation actually fall upon? With the developer, will it?
The department will be shortly issuing a discussion paper on greenfield estates where it will outline options and issues, and that paper is currently being finalised.
So are you saying you don't know at this stage who the obligation will be upon?
Well, the paper sets out...
Who would it be if it wasn't the developer? Who are the possible victims of this mandating? The developers?
First of all, the discussion paper will have a focus on working with state and local government bodies to work through cooperative arrangements in relation to greenfields estates. The other regulatory issues could relate to obligations on carriers in terms of connections in those estates of telecommunications networks.
So it might not just be the developers who have a legal obligation, it could be carriers as well.
The sort of options that are discussed will be...
if you mandate fibre, someone is going to be forced to install fibre.
Well, I think I'd prefer you to wait until we've released the discussion paper and then you can see when it's finalised, Senator.
Do you have any idea at this stage what the estimated additional cost per home will be of mandated fibre?
I think there could be seen to be a cost issue, but there's also could be seen to be a value issue in terms of homes, and there's also we would expect it to be a small proportion of the overall building costs, and considerably less than the cost of having to retrofit fibre into a home after copper's been introduced. So there is a cost issue, but there's a value issue for consumers to make sure they've got next generation broadband infrastructure.
Yeah, but the point is they're not going to get a choice anymore. They're going to be, going to come with the cost of this. So you can't give me any basis
I'd have
upon
to
which
take the question on notice about
presumably
cost.
before you decided to mandate fibre, you came to a view about the estimated additional cost per home for the first home, the 25-year-old first-time buyer out in the suburbs buying their own home.
I think so I can give you accurate information, Senator. We do have some information, but make sure that it's accurate. I'll take that question on notice.
Okay, thanks. Has the government decided that it will compensate whoever it is that is obliged to install this fibre for the cost of that installation?
There is no proposal at the moment related to that sort of compensation, no.
Well then,
compensation.
Once you have
I'm not sure what compensation you're referring to.
Well, someone's got to pay for it.
We have a discussion paper out, Senator Minchin, where we're inviting all. Sorry, we're about to issue. We're inviting all interested parties, and I personally invited developers to submit to this, to put their views forward. And I'm aware of a wide range of propositions that will be put forward, because I've had some discussions. So once again, you're jumping ahead of the process. We're going to be engaged in detailed discussions with all sectors involved in the Greenfields proposal. And we look forward to that and we welcome that.
I'm sure you do, Senator Conroy, but you must be alive to the issue that this raises, and that is that you are leaving open the possibility that in the case of Greenfields estates where you're mandating fibre, ultimately the home buyer, in most cases in these Greenfield estates, new first home buyers, will bear the cost of the fibre, whereas you've earlier said in evidence to us that your assumption about the $43 billion cost of this thing is that in relation to established housing there will be no cost. It includes the cost right up to the box on the side of the house. Now that is a very major issue. We're not able to get any evidence as to what it will actually cost to connect homes.
You're making a number of assumptions.
Well, I'm asking, it's open to you to rule out that possibility now by saying the government will pay for all the fibre in Greenfield estates.
You are making a number of assumptions.
No, I'm asking you a question as to whether this differential will occur.
That will be teased out and debated through in this discussion paper.
But Senator Conroy, you're leaving open, in evidence to this committee, the possibility that someone living in an established house, you or me in our suburbs of Adelaide and Melbourne, will have the government or NBN code provide us free of charge with this fibre right up to the walls of our houses. But in Greenfields estates, occupied by young first-home buyers by and large, they will bear the cost which, on the figures I've seen, could be thousands of dollars. Now you can eliminate that now by saying, no, we the government, through NBN Co, will be paying for all of this fibre.
Unlike your government, we're in a position where we're going to engage in consultations with the sector about the best way to achieve our objectives.
So you have no idea who's going to pay for the fibre that you'll be mandating.
Look, you're
leaving open.
You're very good at putting
young
words.
Young home buyers will be paying for it.
You are very
good. I find that extraordinary.
You are very good at putting words in my mouth, Senator Minchin.
Well, you can end the speculation right here and now.
You said the discussion paper will tease about when will the teasing stop, Minister, and the answers be given. You accuse Senator Minchin of pure speculation. When will the government stop speculating and start showing Australians what they're going to do, when, where, how and at what price.
Well,
just to give you an example, we've got Mr. Jeff Booth, who'd been known to many of you from Telstra Countrywide, and he said just recently, there's a real appetite in new estates of fibre, and the developers quite rightly see fibre as being a future-proof technology, so they can use that to add value to their developments, and they're keen to put it in there. That's Mr.
He
Jeff
also
Booth.
made it clear that the industry is seeking clarification about whether the government will pay for it as part of its $43 billion, or whether the developers have to continue to pay for it.
And that's
of course,
exactly
if they pay for it, that'll be the home buyer.
That's exactly why we're engaged
So new home
in the
buyers,
discussion.
you're leaving
paper
open
process.
the possibility that new home buyers are discriminated against vis-à-vis buyers of
That is
established
exactly why we are going through the process of the discussion paper.
It's just another area you haven't thought through. This whole thing was done on the run in February and March. This is increasingly evident, Senator Conroy. I think that's all I have for the moment.
Thank you, Senator Minchin. Other senators? Is that it for broadband? Is that it for 1.1?
I'll just jump in with a couple of quick ones if I can, which will jump back over some of the issues that Senator Minchin has covered and others, and I'll apologise if we overlap with any. But firstly, just to clarify the sale arrangements and the position you took the other day, Minister, in comments about the sale arrangements. Do you want to be clear to us today as to what the threshold for selling the government stake will be and when that will occur by?
Subject to the economic circumstances. I think what we've indicated is it's targeted to be 5 years after build is completed, subject to prevailing economic circumstances. I mean, you wouldn't sell it if you're in the middle of a worldwide recession, because you wouldn't necessarily be getting value for taxpayers' money by selling at that point when there was no need to.
Okay. You appear to have indicated in an interview with Mr. Hudson, and discussed various matters that Mr. Hudson's reported upon today. You appear to have indicated that it would be the sale down would be legislated and would be part of the legislative package. Is that correct?
That's correct. We're going to have legislation to address the issue of the sale, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the sale legislation will be included in the package.
Right. So the sale legislation for
the trigger will be contained in the package.
Right. And
now,
how?
as I said, subject to prevailing economic circumstances. So you don't just say, right, we're going to sell it that day no matter what.
Which makes it a fairly flimsy kind of trigger if it's subject to completion of the project 5 years thereafter, subject to certain economic circumstances and so on.
I don't accept your proposition that it's a flimsy trigger. Senator Birmingham, I think it's anything but a flimsy. I don't consider legislation passed through Parliament as flimsy, frankly.
What process will that sale occur by?
That is probably getting a little ahead of.
This is 2023 we're talking, Simon.
I know it's 2023, but apparently we're legislating for it this year.
Senator Birmingham will still be in Parliament then, Senator Minchin.
You and
I will long have retired.
I can assure you I will not be here then. You'll have to handle that sale all on your own, Steve.
I promise you I will.
Whilst I may not wish to be here in 2023, I hope Hansard got Senator Minchin's assurance.
Senator Minchin's taken that down, noted it for the future right-wing voters in the South Australian Liberal Party when you try and say the one more term line. Okay?
I'm just hoping Senator Minchin's. I'm sure he will was noted. But
I'll come and help you sell it, Simon. When you're the Minister for Communications.
They'll be waiting for you even then, Senator Birmingham.
Thank you, Senator Minchin. That would be always very welcome. Right, so you're not sure what the sale process will be. Would it be in different tranches?
Look, frankly, this is a preposterous.
Right,
this is a beyond preposterous question, Senator Birmingham.
Well, you've set a date. You've plucked the date 5 years
at the earliest in 2023. The minister, in the lead up to that, I'm sure will have some very worthwhile opinions about the best way to do this, and I'm sure when he consults the Hansard of the year 2009, he's really not going to care what I thought.
And
Can I just
at the latest, Minister?
Sorry, I
At
said
the
the
latest,
earliest.
yes. And I'm now asking at the latest. Is there...
Even your own senators are amused.
That is a hypothetical.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Troth. I appreciate that Senator Birmingham did deliver it with a straight face, but decorum was not able to be maintained, Senator Birmingham.
I'm amused by your 2023 target, and so I'm wondering if you're going to set when it can happen. Is there actually a date by which it must happen? Obviously not.
We've said 5 years after the build is complete, subject to prevailing economic circumstances. That's not a get-out clause, Senator Birmingham.
Can I ask Senator Conrad just on that same issue? Because I understand what you just said, that the
Crows will not have won another premiership, all right? Collingwood may not have either, but the Crows certainly won't have.
On that grossly offensive statement, Senator
can we
Mitchell and I
try and keep it together for a little bit longer?
Both of them will have won a couple, Senator Troth, I can see.
The legislation you just said that we're to be presented with later this year with respect to NBN Co will include, a trigger for sale, will it? But will this legislation that you will present later this year, give the government of the day the legislative authority to sell its shares, or will legislation specifically be required for that?
That's the intent.
Look, I think the intent is to not require further legislation.
Right.
That's the intent.
Good. I'd recommend that myself.
Yeah.
But I'll be interested in
Still got
your...
the scars.
I'll be interested... I'd love to be present when you bring that to the caucus, however, Senator Conrad. Good luck. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Senator Mitchell. The tenders for the implementation study have now...
Lead advisors, for the implementation study have now closed. And
the expressions of interest.
I apologise.
Right, yeah.
And when can we expect progress on that? What's the timeline there?
This examination of the expressions of interest has been occurring, and we'll be proposing to go to the next stage shortly. I don't think we can be probably too much more definitive than that.
No, the lead advisor is expected to be appointed by early July.
By early July. And are any of the advisors or consultants from NBN 1, Mark 1, being carried over into this process?
Could I just ask you to clarify that question? I just want to know what you mean by that. You mean
have they automatically rolled over, or do they all have to reapply?
Well, are any of them being rolled over?
Marianne, wait till we find out.
Or will
There's
it be
different
back
things.
to...
The previous advisors, and I'm sure Patricia will correct me if I'm wrong, the previous advisors work for the department.
Yeah.
This is the lead advisor for the implementation study, so they're two different projects.
Yeah, I think it's...
Yeah, so they haven't automatically transferred across.
No,
I think is what he's seeking.
Is that right? Is that what you mean, Senator?
Yes, well, in terms of your legal advisors and financial advisors and others who advised the expert panel, I'm assuming during the process that we just went through around the RFP, will any of those companies, KPMG, Cause Chambers, Westgarth, quite a list of them, will any of them be carried over as advisors for this project?
Okay, those initial contracts have now finished, and we will be engaging some new advisors, and we'll be going through selection processes for those, and obviously the most important at the present is the lead advisor, and it will be subject to strict tendering procurement arrangements. You wouldn't want to say that the person who was successful at Project A would be ruled out from Project B, but they are separate processes. The first has finished, ceased, the second has now commenced. I won't be surprised if some people seek to be involved again, but that doesn't necessarily, it goes through a selection process a second time.
The funding for implementation and establishment that included the mysterious 1.1 for Department of Finance, but has 53.2, which is a figure I'm sure you recognise.
53.2. I'm so pleased you asked me about that.
53.2. I'm sure you recognise instantly, Ms. Scott.
Yes, that's right. Would you like to get an explanation for that?
If you could break down the 53.2 a little, that would be helpful.
Okay. The government has provided the department funding of $53.2 million in 2009-10 for the implementation and establishment of the National Broadband Network, in particular to conduct the implementation study, the early implementation of a network in Tasmania, implementation of the Regional Backbone Black Spots program, and the development of legislation and the regulatory framework. Okay.
Is it, and you can take this one on notice, are you able to provide breakdowns within that 53.2?
We will be able to do that historically, Senator, but because we're actually now in the process of getting a lead advisor and getting some of this other work done and obtaining advisors for some of this work, if we actually itemised it now, we'd be effectively telling them how much we're prepared to pay. So I'd probably prefer to do that historically, and so maybe in the future estimates you'd like to ask us that question.
Okay. Will any of that be paid into the NBN company?
Into the NBN company? Well, some of it could be. I mean, we've engaged that guy. The guy we've engaged. We're paying him, aren't we? Yeah, but at the moment we're paying him. You're not paying him? No. You sure? Yes, that's for 2019. Oh, yeah, good point. Sorry, I think the answer is going to be no. Can I just have the question again, just to be certain?
Yes. Will any of the budgeted $53.2 million for the next financial year be paid into or through the NBN company?
We don't anticipate that's the case. No.
Right. Okay. And just for clarity, because of course I wasn't around in the Telstra days when it was still 51% or more government owned, but I assume that the NBN company will be appearing at future Senate estimates, much to their joy. This may hinder their ability to recruit a good chief executive.
But to be fair, I think we've really considered that. I'll happily take that on notice and come back to you.
Okay, thank you. If you could.
And I do remember consistently asking for the CEO of Telstra to turn up, and they never once did, just for the record, no matter how many invitations the committee made to them.
Sounds like the managing director of Australia Post at present, but I don't need you to go through them all now, Ms. Scott. But you undertook at the beginning on notice to give Senator Minchin the final costs associated with the RFP process and NBN stage 1.
I said I'd take it on notice, Senator.
You did say you'd take it on notice. Just because Senator Minchin asked for those final total costs, if I could also ask for them to be broken down for where external consultants were engaged and the final total costs for each of those consultants.
We have provided that sort of information in the past. I think it goes up to March, so I understand where you're heading.
That's right, but March 31, in fact, must be pretty close to final.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Okay, thank you.
And that's the sort of level of detail you're after, Senator.
That was very good last time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further questions for program 1.1, Senators?
Just quickly on the regulatory review. Minister, you had an interesting discussion with Senator Lundy about the 6 degrees of separation that may or may not
that you failed to notice Telstra's wholesale and retail clients didn't have.
What?
The 6 degrees of separation that Telstra's wholesale and retail clients didn't have.
Didn't have, that's right. I note in your discussion paper in summarising the sorts of issues that you may that are being considered, you say the government has not decided to proceed with any particular option at this time. So I take that to mean the government is not necessarily committed to any further separation. You have an open mind on this whole issue.
Well, that's why we have a regulatory. That's why we have a regulatory paper. But
I'm just confirming that
I
you have
have
an open mind on that issue.
repeatedly stated that we believe that the existing operational separation regime, as we demonstrated when we voted against it, wasn't a satisfactory outcome. And that's why we've got the regulatory paper out to discuss alternatives. But no one should be under any illusions. We voted against the operational separation regime that currently exists. Yeah. So we clearly demonstrated we did not believe it could satisfactorily achieve the objectives of even your government's policy at the time.
So the government is not sort of formally resolved to implement some greater degree of separation. It's simply a question of how much. That's not the position. You're saying that the government is looking at a range of options, but hasn't.
No, we don't have a final.
But you have an open mind, and one
but
of the
we certainly
is
believe
presumably the status quo.
Well, the status quo we don't believe has worked.
Right.
We voted against it on the basis.
Status quo is not an option.
The status quo we've made clear we believe has failed. The ACCC opposed. Well, that's not fair to say they opposed it. They indicated that they believed there were better options than the previous operational separation regime. I think they sat in one of these rooms and outlined
I don't
their
want to know
concerns.
their view. I want to know where the government is at.
No. The point I'm making is that the operational separation regime that exists today, we did not support in Parliament. We voted against it. And I've repeatedly said that we believe that the existing set of regulatory frameworks has failed. So I would probably say yes, that the status quo is not something that anybody supported in the regulatory discussion process that we...
Apart from Telstra, presumably.
Yeah. Just quoting from the document, which said, maintaining the current separation arrangements will not deal with the issues concerning Telstra's use of its vertical integration. In light of this, there are a number of options the government is considering.
Yeah, I'm just drawing your attention to your statement that the government has not decided to proceed with any particular option at this time. Does that, so we take it to mean you will proceed with one of the options in there, but you're not sure which one at this stage?
That's why we have a discussion paper. We have an open mind based on the discussion paper. We'll be determining our position. I mean, we quite clearly state the government does not have a predetermined view on these matters, and we have an open mind about the reforms that should be pursued. That's stated on page 4, under my name even.
Not inconsistent.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm just trying to clarify, the extent of the openness of your mind. I think what I glean from your comments are that while you've not decided to proceed with any particular option,
that status quo
in relation to separation, where you've set out really two options, strengthening the current operational separation regime, option 2, functional separation. I think they're the two options you're looking at. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Right. So we take it that status quo is not one of the options you'll be considering. Is that correct?
I think I just read you out a paragraph which said...
It's page before, sorry, no, so there it is.
Maintaining the current separation arrangements will not deal with the issues concerning Telstra's use of its vertical integration. In the light of this, there are a number of options the government is considering.
So, and then you set out two options. So I assume you're considering those two options.
Well, the purpose of a discussion paper is to see if there's any other options that might be generated.
Right.
But certainly we've outlined a couple.
So you are not prepared to rule out structural separation?
It's not in the paper.
It's not in the paper. We've never...
well, it's in...
I don't believe I've ever advocated it.
Telstra might want to do it.
Telstra may volunteer it.
Yeah.
Who knows? There's a new regime in town.
There was a newspaper article suggesting that they might, wasn't there?
Yeah, there was even a newspaper article suggesting that they may contemplate it. So who knows what the new future will look like, Senator Mitchell. It's one of the reasons we've got a discussion paper. I'm not saying I believe. Can I say I'm not saying I believe the newspaper article, but
so you're not ruling out. Well, I'm asking you whether you'd rule out forced structural separation.
I'm not advocating it. I've never advocated it. I think I can say that.
Well, interestingly, Senator Conroy, and
the process.
I don't criticise you for this. You've never actually advocated. separation as far as I can tell. It's never been.
I've certainly never advocated structural separation. I don't believe. I think that's a true statement. What I have said, though, is the existing regime is not satisfactory. So that probably leaves you a spectrum from there. But if, for instance, the incumbent come forward and said, "Hey, look, this is what we think," now
the ALP didn't go to the last election with a formal policy on this.
No, we went with the NBN.
Yeah.
And we're delivering and exceeding on it as you keep.
Please.
As you keep.
It's quite denying.
Well, we can stop asking questions about 1.1 any time you like. One of two things will happen: either my voice will completely give up on me, or we will change.
I'm sorry if we're keeping you up.
No,
I think after some 7 hours on the NBN, I've had enough. But,
You are a trooper. You are a trooper, Senator.
I was trying to do the right thing by you, Minister, and look what happens.
Look, I actually just want to ask some questions about the Digital Regions Initiative.
Digital region.
And some questions it relates back to. It does relate back to the NBN, because I wanted to ask
Fair enough.
how this initiative works.
Sorry, Senator. I'm just going now. Race to find. I don't have an officer, but
I'm actually happy to put them on notice if that's easier.
That'd be marvellous.
You are now officially my favourite senator.
Thank you very much,
I'll place
Senator.
my questions on notice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh no!
Sorry,
I think now I know why Senator Minchin doesn't like you.
It's okay. We won't be too long. I just wanted to quickly jump back and touch briefly on some of the regulatory stuff, but hopefully only quickly. Minister, in terms of the regulatory framework, you're pursuing now, as we discussed, a further review given the new context, following the review from last year, which looked into options for the regulatory framework. You were quite scathing of how the current system works in your comments. Are there any interim changes you're considering?
Interim between now and June the 3rd?
Well,
no.
Between now and when you actually get your
our
total
intention,
new regime
is to bring forward legislation in the second half of this year, and we look forward to your support and speedy passage.
Will that legislation deal with what will be an existing framework in the rest of
Australia
for
it'll be the
most
outcome arising from the discussion paper, so we look forward to your speedy support.
And in terms of your damning assessment of how things currently work, are you largely writing off all of Australia's? Are there any areas of success you can recognise in the Australian communications landscape where you think things may have worked reasonably well?
Well, that's why we've got a discussion paper. But I think if you looked at, 80-odd submissions, 82 last time, not one submission recommended the status quo. Some of them recommended in different directions, but no one recommended the status quo. Clearly, the unanimous view of the sector was the existing structure was not working.
Including Glasson's. Glasson's was...
And the Glasson review also was scathing.
Most people can come up with some levels of suggestions for change, and some will suggest more than others. My question is, in terms of unbundling rates, for example, do you think Australia has actually progressed well in that regard?
We have set out